And I would note, this happens to be an individual that I don't always align with philosophically.
I'm coming.
In another grotesque prosecution, the weaponized Biden-Harris Justice Department recently sentenced a 75-year-old grandmother, Paulette Harlow, to a 24-month federal prison sentence. And again, in the case of Eva Idle, an 89-year-old, I repeat, 89-year-old death camp survivor who is awaiting federal sentencing for her peaceful advocacy for praying for the unborn at abortion clinics, where prison time could be a potential death sentence given her age.
Well, too bad, then don't do it.
A survivor of concentration camps and abuse in Europe.
Where?
And still you don't see the weaponized Biden-Harris Justice Department pursuing anti-life activists who
that doesn't
vandalize
allow
pro-life
her
clinics with
to
the same
stop
vigor.
people from
One day after the Dobbs leak, a
accessing
pregnancy
abortion
resource center
care
near
without
the University
fucking
of
being
Texas campus
harassed.
was vandalized
So
with
fuck
pro-abortion
off, Grandma.
slogans. Banners were torn down, and memorial bricks were dug up
Fuck
from the
off,
sidewalk,
Grandma.
all while activists chanted, "My body, my choice." No arrests were made. Similarly, a pregnancy resource center in Houston was vandalized with "Abortion for All" written on the front of the clinic, locks gluing the entrance shut, causing
I want to scrape
$10,000
his
in damage.
uterus. No, I'm just
No
kidding.
arrests were made.
He doesn't have a uterus.
But it doesn't stop with the FACE Act either. This law is just one tool that the Biden-Harris DOJ has issued in its years-long crusade against political dissenters. The DOJ's Civil Rights Division has chosen to undermine election integrity laws, suing states like Virginia for taking steps to ensure election integrity. The DOJ targeted Ethan Heim after he revealed that his employer, the Texas Children's Hospital, is performing illegal transgender medical interventions on minors. The DOJ's Civil Rights Division opened pattern or practice investigation into local police departments in search of patterns of misconduct during the height of the defund the police movement.
I'm good. I'm good.
They advise colleges on how to get around SCOTUS's ruling on affirmative action, ensuring race remains a key factor for admissions. The Biden-Harris DOJ would rather focus its time and resources on these efforts
when he gets
as well
pregnant,
as
he can
go after
talk all
pro-life
the shit he
grandmothers, sentencing them to years of federal prison for, at best, a trespassing charge instead of targeting actual
I don't
criminals.
feel sorry for Granny.
The Civil Rights Division has been used as a tool against the civil rights of the American people, undermining their freedom and liberties. While we expect the incoming administration to end this horrific practice at the DOJ, that is not good enough. The American people deserve to know that their rights will not be violated regardless of which administration is in power. It is long time for Congress to address this weaponization legislatively. The Republican Congress must start to ensure that future weaponization is not possible by passing the legislation H.R. 5577 to repeal the FACE Act. And it's not enough to merely end Biden-era discrimination. We must act to reverse these wrongful imprisonments, reuniting families who've been collateral damage of this administration. The Trump administration should consider pardoning and commuting the sentences of FACE Act defendants who have been victims of this targeted harassment. Unequal application of the law is not truly law. It is tyranny imposed on those who didn't have the power by those who do have it. That's contrary to everything we believe as Americans. I thank our witnesses, some of whom know these abuses all too well, for being here today to address the need for fundamental and permanent reforms at the Department of Justice.
Absolutely
I now
love that
yield
idea,
to the
Orrin.
ranking member
Yay for
for her
Herb.
opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us. So we're here today, according to this hearing's title, revisiting the implications of the FACE Act Part 2. Part 1 occurred in May 2023 under the chairmanship of now Speaker Johnson. And during the intervening year and a half, things really haven't changed that much. We continue to see heightened political violence concerning reproductive rights, particularly by right-wing extremists. We continue to see the House GOP's efforts to claim disproportionate enforcement under the FACE Act, all while ignoring the disproportionately greater number of attacks against reproductive health care facilities that provide abortion care. And we continue to see our GOP colleagues ignoring facts and pushing a false narrative of selective enforcement in order to form a pretext for repeal of the FACE Act. What's become clear in the intervening months is that this attack upon the FACE Act is part of a coordinated, extreme, anti-choice agenda that seeks to gut reproductive rights and effectively ban abortion care in the United States. That agenda is outlined in the extremist conservative manifesto called Project 2025, which was rolled out just weeks before Part 1 of this hearing. Unless our Republican colleagues once again deny any connection between Project 2025 and their actions, we should note that both parts of this hearing have parroted the false narrative of Project 2025, claiming selective enforcement against anti-abortion advocates, on page, I believe it's 568 of Project 2025. And each of today's majority witnesses have close ties to Project 2025. Ms. Hawley is an anti-abortion lawyer and senior counsel at the Alliance Defending Freedom, the ADF, which is a Project 2025 advisory board member.
Is that Mrs.
Mr.
Hawley?
Vaughn's arrest under the FACE Act for blockading
Josh
a
Hawley?
reproductive health care facility for which he was convicted by a jury is cited, I'm sorry, it was on page 558 of Project 2025. I do have to correct the chair's statement that Mr. Vaughn was arrested for praying at that facility. In fact, the record is quite clear. His arrest was for blockading the facility, not praying. And Mr. Crampton, of course, was Mr. Vaughn's attorney in that case. So they all have close ties to this manifesto. So in revisiting the FACE Act today, our Republican colleagues are really just giving themselves another opportunity to signal their support to the extremists plotting to criminalize or block access to abortion across the country. And the only thing that's changed since the first iteration of this hearing is public awareness of the deeply unpopular plans outlined in Project 2025. Over the past year and a half, House Republicans have attempted to cloak their unpopular agenda with misleading claims that their policies will support women, children, and civil rights. But those claims have repeatedly turned up empty, because the truth is every step they take towards a nationwide abortion ban drastically undermines the health and well-being of American women and children. And furthermore, it violates women's rights to make their own personal medical decisions without politicians invading their doctor's offices and their private
I'm sorry you're
business.
sick. Everyone's sick right now.
The Freedom
you
of
and
Access to
Carla.
Clinic Entrances
So
Act, or
sorry.
FACE Act, protects facilities providing access to abortion and other reproductive health services, as well as places of religious worship, protects them from the use of force, threats, intimidation, or physical obstruction. The record from the subcommittee's hearing on this topic in May of last year is clear. There's no credible evidence to support Republican allegations that the FACE Act is being selectively enforced. Even so, if our colleagues were actually concerned about that, you'd assume they'd be calling for stronger and broader enforcement of the FACE Act. Instead, our subcommittee chair and 47 other House Republicans have introduced legislation to repeal the FACE Act. Actions speak louder than words, and with that action, the motivation here is very clear. In repealing the FACE Act, they would invite every anti-abortion extremist to use violence, threats, intimidation to block access to abortion services everywhere, even in states where it's legal. A nationwide ban in practice, if not in law. Congress passed the FACE Act in 1994 in response to 2 decades of escalating violence, intimidation, and blockades against abortion providers and their patients. The need for this protection was extremely clear, as the House Judiciary Committee and the Senate Labor and Human Resources Committee detailed numerous incidents in their respective committee reports of abortion providers being subjected to horrifying threats, including murder. Dr. David Gunn was murdered by an anti-abortion extremist outside a clinic in Pensacola, Florida in March 1993. The House report on the FACE Act noted that Dr. Gunn's murder was the tragic culmination of years of threats, blockades, and personal attacks. In addition to threats against providers, both committees detailed incidents where abortion clinics were the targets of arson, bombings, chemical attacks, and blockades by anti-abortion extremists that resulted in sometimes severe injuries for doctors, clinic workers, volunteers, patients, and others. Today, the FACE Act remains an important deterrent to political violence regarding reproductive health care. Since January 2021, the Department of Justice has brought 25 FACE Act cases involving 57 defendants. And yes, those cases have involved both abortion providers and anti-abortion facilities. And of course, we must condemn all political violence and threats of violence, whatever the beliefs or motivations of those who engage in it, and regardless of who the target may be. But it remains that abortion providers and their patients are actually the ones who face higher levels of violence. And to the extent there's a disparity in FACE Act prosecution, that disparity is a reflection of the facts. A 2022 report from the National Abortion Federation, which we introduced into the record in Part 1 of this hearing, confirmed that anti-abortion violence is escalating in the wake of the Dobbs decision. That report detailed that there was a 100% increase in arsons and a 20% increase in threats of death and harm against clinics and providers as compared to 2021. There was also a 229% increase in stalking from 2021 to 22, indicating an increase of reports of providers and patients being followed as they entered, exited, traveled to, or traveled from clinics. Moreover, that report noted that after the Supreme Court issued its decision in Dobbs, clinics in states where abortion remains legal saw a disproportionate increase in violence and disruption. This escalating violence is part of an anti-abortion extremist campaign to achieve by extra-legal means what they've been politically unable to do since Dobbs, which is to enact a nationwide abortion ban. This decades-long effort, which the FACE Act has helped to de-escalate, involves intimidating doctors and providers from delivering necessary and often life-saving reproductive care, and denying access to healthcare facilities where women can exercise the freedom to make decisions impacting their own health and their family's well-being. Because as a leader of the anti-abortion group Operation Rescue said when asked during the FACE Act passage, if there's no one willing to conduct abortions, there are no abortions. Republican lawmakers are now trying to turn the FACE Act into yet another rallying cry in their culture war against abortion, blatantly politicizing a law that's about protecting Americans and keeping them safe. And in doing so, they knowingly enable dangerous and hostile rhetoric that threatens women's access to reproductive health care all across this country. And ultimately, that makes them complicit in the consequences of those actions. No one deserves to be denied medical care because of someone else's political or religious beliefs. Everyone deserves the freedom to provide or seek appropriate medical care without threats to their own safety. And all women deserve the freedom to work with their doctors to decide on and access the health care that's right for them. That's the America that I and my Democratic colleagues are fighting for, because that's the America our constituents deserve. I yield back.
I thank the ranking member. I would note that at least one thing that has changed since 2023, as the ranking member referenced saying nothing had changed, is we sent a letter to the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice responded in a letter. I'd ask that we consent that we insert that in the record. And without objection, we'll put it in the record. That confirms the numbers that I cited in the opening statement, that there have been 24 FACE Act cases against 55 defendants, obtaining 34 convictions, and of which only 2 were directed, as they say here, towards pro-life, directed towards something that isn't attacking.
Well, that's
pro-lifers.
because we're not violent like you all are.
Ask the,
Okay, I have news for
Chairman,
you. There's a
again,
reason for that.
Offer an opening statement.
I think the chairman, yeah, only 2. And what we forgot, what the ranking member didn't mention, is in the aftermath of the Dobbs leak and the Dobbs decision that spring and summer, 103 churches and crisis pregnancy centers were attacked. She used the term extremist for the pro-life people.
How were they
We're
attacked?
against all violence. I agree
Well, you
with that
need to be
statement.
more specific,
But
Jimmy.
that was not in any way an accurate picture of what took place in that summer, and frankly, the disparity in who's prosecuted under the FACE Act. Here's the bottom line. Government has been weaponized against we the people.
Aww.
September 23rd, 2022, Mark Houck at home in Pennsylvania. 10 unmarked cars pull up to his house at 6:30 a.m. and arrest him in front of his wife and 7 kids.
That's 7?
What they arrest him
What
for?
the fuck?
Praying in front of an abortion clinic and protecting his son from some crazy person
Why is his
screaming
son
swear
at an
words
abortion
in his
clinic?
child's
Wait a minute.
face.
Why is his son
fact,
at an abortion?
He was
Wait, what?
prosecuted, went to court, and the jury of his peers found him not guilty. 12
Okay,
days
that's
after
the
he's
way it works.
arrested,
Whoop,
our
whoop.
witness, Mr. Vaughn, at home in Pennsylvania and arrested in front of his wife and 11 children. And what was he doing? Exactly what the chairman said, praying and singing hymns outside of an abortion clinic. Just came and got him.
That's
March
the wrong
5th,
place to
2024,
sing
in
and
Mr.
pray.
Big State,
Okay, sorry.
Penny
People
McCarthy,
are busy there. They're doing
66-year-old
things.
grandmother. In her driveway,
we've
U.S.
heard about this
Marshals
granny.
pull up, guns drawn,
Wait, how old
and
is she?
arrest
My
her.
age?
They said she violated a parole violation for a nonviolent offense from 25 years earlier. And they show up with guns drawn and arrest this lady. She said, I think you got the wrong person. And guess what? She was right. They had the wrong person.
Okay, that's terrible.
And of
Fire
course,
Chris
we had a
Ray.
hearing on this, right here in this room. Brian Malinowski. Top official, highest paid official in the municipal government in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Oh my God.
gun hobbyist,
And that's-
sold 6 guns.
Yeah,
and
it was
the
one of
ATF
those hymns
said,
about
"You're a felon
blood,"
because
right?
you sold 6 guns without a
Oh,
license."
this guy. Remember this
And they
guy
show
from
up,
the...
again, 10
oh,
cars.
Jesus.
Show up at 6:01
All I did was sell some
a.m.
guns on the
First thing
internet.
you see,
I
'cause
don't
we got the video, the
understand
first
why
thing they
you're
do is
being
walk up
so
and put
mean to
tape on the doorbell
me.
cam.
They're my
53 seconds
guns.
after they
Why can't
put
I
tape
sell
on the
my
doorbell
guns
cam,
on the
Ryan
interwebs?
Malinowski is
I
shot
didn't
and later dies.
understand. I didn't know I was coming
They
back
weren't
either.
even. This wasn't even a arrest warrant.
This is a
was search
hearing
warrant.
on the FACE
They've
Act,
been
which
surveilling
is
this guy for
how
2
they've
weeks. They were
protected
gonna go the
abortion
week before,
clinics
but found out he
from
wasn't home, so they
violent
waited for him to be
protest.
home. I mean,
But
you
Jimmy's
can't
very
make
upset
any
about
sense of
it.
what they
Nope,
did.
it's not that.
Government has certainly been weaponized
But
against
he's
we
the
the people.
weaponized
And of course,
government
last
guy,
week,
so
what did
he's
we find out
bringing
last
in
week?
everything. This is his
2
last time
Inspector
to
General
really get his
reports
yayas out.
came
so
out
he
last
can
week. The
hammer
first
one
one
out in the
said,
back corner.
When Chris Wray first started at the FBI, they spied on Capitol Hill staffers. And here's the amazing thing.
This
One
is
of the
his
guys they
big-
spied on is the guy who's going to replace
His
Chris
big
Wray.
climax.
They spied on Kash Patel. Got the email, who you're emailing to, emails coming into you, phone calls. Did that to and it was Democrats too. Democrats should be just as outraged. They were spying on Republican and Democrat staffers.
Well, see, the problem is,
And of course, the
Jimmy,
second
is
report that
that
came out
you
last week from the
select
Inspector
the
General,
pieces of information
find
that
out
you
that
think
there
are
were
important,
26
thereby creating your
confidential
own
human
story,
sources
which actually doesn't
here in the
really
Capitol,
totally match up
at the
with
Capitol.
reality.
Well, some of them came in the
That's
Capitol.
my problem.
26 of them on January 6th.
Oh, no, and the guy that he's talking
17
about with
went
the
in the
guns,
restricted
he
area,
was just
4 went in the
selling guns
Capitol,
illegally,
0
and he's an
were
asshole.
arrested.
And we've gone over his story before. He's a
Remember,
real jerk.
confidential human source is a fancy name for spy.
It is not. Confidential human
Spying on
sources are
Americans.
used
That
in
day.
law
And we also know
enforcement,
they spied
Jim.
on parents, right?
Oh, my God.
Spied on moms and dad going to school board meetings. We know that they set up a
Jesus
snitch line. You could
Christ.
report on parents. One of the FBI whistleblowers that came
No,
and
they
testified in front of this
didn't.
committee, this Congress
There was a
told
lot
us
of
he was sent to go
violence.
get license
I
plates
know.
from parents in the parking lot when they're at a school board meeting.
That's right, because in
Our
the
government
parking
doing
lot,
that.
they were terrorizing and threatening
all
and
this
being
makes me wonder,
violent, and
are
they
they
were
spying? Might they
astroturfed
be
by people who were
spying
not parents
pro-life
and
activists?
agitated. So yes, that's
Americans who are
right. I
concerned about
want
the
law
sanctity of human
enforcement
life?
to
Might they be
investigate
doing
that
that?
because I want
Well,
it
guess
safe for
what?
everyone to go to a
They tried
school
that
board
too.
meeting, you
They
stupid
tried
cuck.
that too, because we got the memorandum from the Richmond field office.
I got the
Earlier this Congress,
Jimmy
page 4
Jordan
of this memo,
blues.
says we now have new opportunities to mitigate violent extremism threat through
I
outreach to
got those
traditional
Jimmy
Catholic
Jordan.
parishes
I
and the
haven't
development of
pooped
sources
and
with
I've
the
got
placement
my
and access to
last
report
day
on places of worship.
blues.
Now that's fancy FBI speak for we're going to put spies in the parish, spies in
Guess
the church.
what? My friends
in
are
America.
gonna be in
And you
charge.
got, look, all
And
this stuff
I
happened.
won't have the
So thank the good Lord
blues
we had a change in this
anymore.
administration
I won't have
back on
those
November 5th. I want to
Jimmy
thank the chairman
Jordan
for his tireless work on
blues
advocating for the sanctity of
anymore.
life and looking at this law. I want to thank Ms. Hawley,
That's
Mr.
right.
Vaughn, what you've been through,
I
both of you for
love
coming
your
and testifying, Mr.
husband.
Crampton,
He's
for your good work at the
so
Thomas More Society and for you being with us today. Protecting
I'm
the sanctity of life is critically
so
important, and just as important is the First Amendment. Your right to speak, your right to pray, all the rights we enjoy under the First Amendment. And that's why this committee, which is charged with protecting the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, and those important freedoms we have as Americans, is so darn important. I thank the chairman for all his good work and yield back.
I thank the chairman, and now with that, I would
What did you say,
recognize
Jim?
the ranking member of the full committee.
Oh, yeah.
Mr.
I
Nadler, for
totally
his
need an
opening statement.
Thank you,
assistant.
Mr.
I
Chairman.
agree,
Mr.
Max.
Chairman,
Where are they?
Since the last time this subcommittee held a hearing on the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, or the FACE Act, over a year ago, judiciary Republicans have found zero, credible or direct evidence that supports their specious claims regarding what they allege is the Department of Justice's uneven enforcement of the FACE Act. What has changed since then is that the subcommittee chairman, along with
They
47
weren't
of his fellow
employees.
House
They're
Republicans,
very well accounted
have once
for.
again
If the
said
chuds
the
would
quiet
like to
part aloud.
read about
They have
the
introduced the bill
confidential human
to
sources,
repeal
it's
the
actually a
FACE
couple
Act
days ago
altogether.
on a
That's
Wake
right.
and Bake with this baby
Anti-abortion
girl.
extremists
That's right.
continue
This
to
girl
use
read it
violence,
for you.
threats, and disruption to curb access to abortion. So Republicans want to repeal the law that explicitly protects patients, providers, and facilities that provide reproductive health services from these ongoing threats. Republicans claim that prosecutors are selectively targeting anti-abortion protesters under the FACE Act and declining to prosecute threats against anti-abortion facilities. but there is zero evidence for their claims. To the contrary, it appears that DOJ is enforcing the law without regard to defendants' viewpoints. I fear, however, that once Republicans complete their takeover of the federal government next year, they will use these sham allegations as a pretext to put a bill revoking the FACE Act's important federal protections on President Trump's desk. This would represent a dangerous and unacceptable attack on public safety. The FACE Act was enacted because of a long documented history of violence specifically directed against abortion providers, their staff, and their patients. The American people need strong enforcement of the law even more now in the wake of continued and escalating violence, threats, and intimidation against women and their doctors post-Dobbs. According to the most recent report issued by the National Abortion Federation, anti-abortion extremists have intensified their efforts to block access to abortion facilities in those states that protect the right to obtain an abortion. Even by their own terms, FACE Act repeal is a nonsensical course of action. If House Republicans' supposed concern is uneven enforcement of the FACE Act, why wouldn't they simply call for the incoming Trump administration to prioritize cases involving protection of anti-abortion facilities, which are explicitly protected under the FACE Act? Instead, the chairman and his Republican colleagues have come up with a new, equally farcical pretext for attacking the FACE Act, namely that it is unconstitutional and should be eliminated altogether. While the Supreme Court has not weighed in on the constitutionality of the act, that is because, as far as I can tell, every federal circuit court of appeals that has considered the issue has upheld the FACE Act against challenges that the law violates the First Amendment's free speech guarantees or exceeds Congress' authority under the Commerce Clause. House Republicans' manufactured narrative about the FACE Act, however, makes perfect sense if one recognizes that their ultimate goal is to ban abortion nationwide. House Republicans clearly feel more beholden than ever to the special interests of anti-abortion activists over the will of the American people, a majority of whom reject their extreme anti-abortion agenda. As we stand on the eve of the next Trump administration, today's hearing, the last for the Judiciary Committee in the 118th Congress, can only be interpreted as a message from House Republicans to these extreme anti-abortion activists. That message is, sit tight, because Republicans will use the 119th Congress to lay yet another brick in the groundwork for the Trump administration's plans to use complete Republican control of the federal government to block women from obtaining the reproductive health care they need, all while inching towards enacting a total nationwide ban on abortion. House
Oh,
Democrats
that
will not
is
stay
it.
silent
We are
in the face
surrounded
of
by
this onslaught.
incompetence.
We will do
Yes.
everything within our
Lack of
power
initiative.
to protect
Oh, it's
the
a
right to an
lot.
abortion and to resist Republican efforts
There's
to
no
enact
there's no
a
real
nationwide abortion ban.
incentive for
I yield
people to
back.
be like super thorough sometimes, you know, like
Without objection, all
That's
other
what it
opening
feels like.
statements will be included in the record. We will now introduce today's witnesses. Mr. Paul Vaughn. Mr. Vaughn is a pro-life advocate and the president of Personhood Tennessee, an organization dedicated to the advancement of the recognition and protection of life from conception to natural death. He was prosecuted under the FACE Act by the Biden Department of Justice for praying and signing hymns outside an abortion clinic. Mrs. Erin Hawley.
signing hymns.
Mrs. Hawley serves as senior counsel and vice president of the Center for Life and Regulatory Practice at the Alliance Defending Freedom. Prior to joining ADF, she specialized in appellate
And
law.
I get
and
to
private practice
sleep
and has
with
litigated
Josh.
extensively before various federal appellate courts and the United States Supreme Court. She also previously served as an associate professor of law at the University of Missouri, where she taught constitutional law, federal income tax, and other courses. Mr. Steve Crampton. Mr. Crampton is a senior counsel at the Thomas More Society, a nonprofit public interest law firm that focuses on cases involving individual liberty. He has more than 30 years of experience litigating religious liberties cases in both the civil and criminal
This is
justice
the panel
systems.
from hell.
Professor Jessica Waters. Ms. Waters is an assistant professor of justice, law, and criminology at the American University. She also serves as the director of the American University School of Public Affairs Leadership Program. Her research focuses on higher education leadership, student success, and reproductive rights law and policy. We thank our witnesses for appearing today, and we'll begin by swearing you in. Would you please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Thank you. Please be seated. Please know that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. Mr. Vaughn, you may begin. And I would remind everybody to turn your microphones on before you speak.
Chairman Roy, Ranking Member Scanlon, and honorable members of this committee, thank you for entertaining this important discussion today and allowing me to share our story with you. I'd like to speak to you about the DOJ's Project 2022 that happened October 5th at 7 a.m. in the morning when my house was assaulted, my wife and children were terrorized, and I was kidnapped at gunpoint by 4 armed men. I had just sent 3 of my children to the car so I could take them to school when the house began to shake from a loud banging near the front door. I heard men shouting on my porch, "Open up, FBI." The banging continued. As I looked out a side window to check the location of my children, I saw 2 unmarked SUVs with lights flashing, but I did not see my children. The banging continued, and I heard more shouting. I opened the curtains on the front door to find 3 men with guns trained on the door. I asked who they were looking for, and they replied, "We're here for you." They did not identify me or provide identification for themselves. As I believed there was an imminent threat to the safety of my wife and 7 children who were home that day, I determined to surrender myself to them, hoping that they were legitimate law enforcement. I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, staring down the barrels of both a pistol and an automatic weapon pointed at my head. As I did, I asked what authority they were operating under and if they had any identification. I later learned at the same time 3 of my children, ages 12, 14, and 18, were being detained in the side yard on the edge of the woods by a 4th armed man. I was taken without the presentation of a warrant or identification when requested. Make no mistake, this was an armed conflict and I was unarmed. Lethal force was abused and to abridge my God-given and constitutionally secured rights.
Tim, I think we should
At the moment of being
barter.
placed
I'm
in
ready.
handcuffs, I
I'm
became
ready
a
to do
slave to
that.
ideological tyrants, either the ones
Hey,
holding
Lee,
weapons or
we're
the ones they
listening
obey.
to
The event that
the
brought this ill-fated
Republicans
drama
are
to my front
hell-bent
door took
on
place 18
reversing the
months
FACE
prior,
Act,
as been noted.
which protects
Pro-life
abortion
Christians
clinics
gather to care from abortion
and providers
clinics in
from
Mount Juliet to
harassment,
attempt to save
etc.
unborn children
Or
who were scheduled to
primarily,
die that
it can apply
Of the
either
couple hundred
way.
people who attended that day, 8 adults were in fact arrested
So
for
it has to do
nonviolently
with
sitting at abortion
expression
clinic
of
doors.
religious liberty
We're
and
doing
all
this in,
these
like many of
things,
you have
but it's
seen right
really
here in your
Jim
own
Jordan's
buildings,
big
Antifa and BLM and Hamas.
one
I
last
wonder how many of those have faced 10
wank
years of
job
prison for those
for
activities.
himself before he
But the
goes
fact
out
remains that I did not
in a
do any
blaze
of
of
these things.
of
I did nothing that was
farting.
outside constitutionally protected free speech and
That's the
religious
best I can
freedom.
do.
I did nothing that day that I've not done many times since FACE was passed in 1994. I did not sit in, I broke no laws, federal or local, and I was not arrested the day of the event. But yes, Member Scanlon, I did pray that day. I had talked with the police chief and lead
good for
negotiating
you.
team.
Well,
I helped the
that's
police and
stupid.
pro-lifers by messaging back and forth. The police spokesperson complimented us on the peacefulness nature of the event on the evening news. The lead negotiator testified for us in our federal trial. There's a lot of talk about violence around the issue of abortion. Of course, all people of honor and character denounce acts of violence on either side of this issue. But the narrative has been projected against the pro-life people and fails to take into account at least 3 other
I hope
aspects of violence
Scanlon
around this
hands
issue.
him his left nut.
There is violence committed against every unborn child in every abortion. There's violence committed by aggravated fathers or other family members of aborted children.
Look at that
And there's
fucking
violence
fundy
being done to
bitch behind
pro-lifers by
him,
our
like,
own
Oh
government.
yeah, oh
Any serious
yeah.
conversation about violence
yeah,
going forward
that's
needs to
right.
include these 3 facts.
I got my
The FACE
pocket
Act was
Bible right
ostensibly
here.
passed because of violence. But as my family knows
That's
very
what I
well,
would like to
all
know.
it did was give violence
I think
the cover
Scanlon's
of
gonna
law
let
and
us
place it
know.
in the hands of the government. The phrase, "the process is the punishment," and the weaponization of the FACE Act are not just words in our household. We are living the reality of those words. Since my arrest, I've been restricted to the Middle District of Tennessee for over 2 years under control and supervision of the federal government. My family spent 20 months of having a potential decade in prison hanging over their lead provider's head, my head.
Well, then maybe
we endured long,
Mrs.
stressful
Vaughn
days of
should
the actual
step it the
trial,
fuck
enduring
up.
lies and half-truths for the sake of government winning a case with no regards to actually seeking justice.
No.
The process is entailed government agents invading and inspecting our home, calling my home to make sure I'm obeying the rules. It involved giving up my rights as a U.S.
Well,
citizen
then
in spite
don't fuck
of
around
the novel
and you
use
won't
of the
find
1800
out.
conspiracies
That's how
laws. The
that
appeal
works.
court refused to stay the order pending the appeal to find out if this was a legal right or application of the law. All this process is a punishment. And I was the one that did not get jail time. There are those who are in jail today while we are discussing this abuse, some of them for over a year at this point. With the overturning of Roe and the long train of abuses, the
Yeah,
unequal
maybe not
application of
be
the
a
FACE
domestic
Act, there is
terrorist,
no
or
legitimate reason
maybe
for it to
not
remain on
stop
the
people
books.
from getting
It is a
access to
tool
health
whose
care.
sole
Why don't you
purpose
shut
is
the
to
fuck up
stifle
and
free
stay home
speech
and take care
abuse
of
the
those
rights of
7
Christian
little
conservatives. There is
shit
nothing
diapers
that the
you
FACE
got
Act
going on?
does that is not already accomplished by state laws across the land. If abortion is returned to the states,
Is that his
so should
bitch
the
of a
laws
wife
governing it.
behind him? Who's taking care of your kids?
Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. Ms. Hawley, may I give your testimony?
Vomit.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman Roy, Ranking Member Scanlon, and members of the
Oh,
committee.
I got something special
One
for
of the
this
most
little
enduring
bitch.
and crucial features of the American constitutional design is its commitment to the equal application of law. John Adams famously described the republic as a government of laws,
No, wait,
not
let's
of
put it
men,
here.
meaning that in America, the rule of law comes
I guess I have to
before
make
politics.
it smaller.
Yet the Biden administration has broken this promise. It has consistently put politics above the rule of law in its one-sided application of the FACE Act to target pro-life individuals. The text of the FACE Act is
There
clear.
she goes.
Its protections apply to, quote, reproductive health services, which is broadly defined to include not only abortion facilities, but also pregnancy centers. The FACE Act also protects churches and other houses of worship from violence,
so this is what it's
vandalism, and
supposed to protect.
intimidation. But
They're
instead
mad
of applying
because
the FACE
only
Act
they
in an
seem to be
even-handed
getting
way,
arrested
the
when in
Biden
fact
DOJ
they are the
has
ones who
weaponized
mostly
the act
commit
to
the
target
crimes.
pro-life
That's why they are
advocates.
the ones that
Since
get arrested
2001,
the most.
It has brought criminal
That's
or
how that
civil
works.
cases under the FACE Act against 55 individuals, 50 of them pro-life. It has charged 24 cases under the FACE Act, but only 2 in defense of pregnancy centers. Since the Dobbs decision was leaked in May of 2022, there have been close
By
to
Ginny
100
Thomas.
pregnancy care centers that have been vandalized, spray-painted, or firebombed. Yet only 8% of the Biden DOJ's FACE Act cases have been filed to protect pregnancy centers. Again, those 2 cases. As for churches, again expressly protected by
Honey,
the
that's
FACE Act,
because
the Family Research Council has
people on our
identified
side of this issue don't
436
commit as many
instances of
crimes as
threats
you
or
do.
violence
It's
in
fairly
2023
simple.
alone. Shockingly, the Biden Department of Justice has failed to initiate a single FACE Act prosecution to protect a house of worship. Take just a few examples of the violence confronting pro-life organizations. On June 7th, 2022, Compass Care's office in Buffalo, New York, was firebombed and tagged with spray paint reading, "Jane was here." 3 days later, on June 10th, the Gresham Pregnancy Resource Center in Oregon was set
Did
on
they
fire.
investigate it?
And on June 25th, Life Choices in Longmont, Colorado, was firebombed and spray painted with the message, "If abortions aren't safe, neither are you."
Oh my
Not only
God.
has the Biden Justice Department
From having
demonstrated
abortions?
bias in
Wait,
its
how's
refusal
that-
to
what?
prosecute
What?
violence against pro-life organizations, but for the first time in
No,
the
no
FACE
one
Act's
should do
history,
any
the
terroristic
Biden
things,
DOJ
but I
has
wonder,
used the
what's
FACE
all the
hook-
information,
excuse me, the
Mrs.
FACE
Hawley?
Act as a
Can you give
hook
us some more
to tack
context
on
about
an
how those cases
additional
were adjudicated?
conspiracy against
I'd really
rights
appreciate that.
felony
Oh, no, you
charge.
can't? Okay.
This charge comes with a potential 10-year prison sentence, even for nonviolent civil disobedience, showing how the Biden DOJ has upped the ante, placing pro-life Americans in as much jeopardy as possible. Take Eva Idle, an 89-year-old survivor of a Soviet concentration camp who sat in front of the entrance to an abortion clinic in a wheelchair.
Well, then she
Because
shouldn't
the
have
Biden
been there.
DOJ
And
tacked
maybe
on the
somebody should have
conspiracy
taken her
charge,
home.
Eva could face a sentence up to 11 years in federal prison, along with hundreds of thousands of dollars in federal fines, all for singing and praying from her
That's not what
wheelchair.
she was doing, apparently.
The Biden DOJ's one-sided use of the FACE Act raises serious concerns about viewpoint-based selective enforcement. While the executive branch does have discretion to decide whether to prosecute a case, it cannot selectively enforce the law in a way that violates the Constitution. As the federal courts have said, this is antithetical to a free society. The Biden DOJ has consistently declined to enforce the FACE Act against individuals attacking pregnancy centers and churches, while vigorously enforcing it against pro-life advocates. That's the definition of selective enforcement.
What is it? It's
To
2
make
out
matters
of,
worse, the FACE
what,
Act is
12?
a questionable exercise of Congress's Commerce Clause authority. The
2
federal
out of
government
12
is
were
one of limited enumerated powers.
not their
Thus,
people
in
or
United States
something?
versus Lopez and United States versus Morrison, the Supreme Court struck down 2 criminal statutes because they had nothing to do with commerce. These cases rejected the argument that Congress may regulate crime so long as it has an aggregate effect on an economic activity. That would obliterate the distinction between what is national and what is local. To be clear, there's never any excuse for violence in expressing one's viewpoint. Repealing the FACE Act would not mean that criminal conduct could occur with impunity or without legal consequence. Every state has laws that regulate trespass, assault, disorderly
Oh,
conduct.
she just doesn't
unlawful
want it to be
assembly,
there, you
and the
know,
like.
just for everybody,
In sum,
not just for
the
her
FACE Act has been
folks. No, no,
weaponized to
no.
target
You don't
pro-life
understand.
activity while
This
leaving
is for
pregnancy
everybody.
centers
This
and
isn't
churches
right or
largely
left.
Unprotected.
It
This is
is,
not
actually.
the even-handed application
She
of
wants
the
to
law
strip
the American
protections
people
from
deserve.
both her organizations
Thank
as
you, Ms.
well
Hawley.
as
Mr. Crampton, you may provide your
clinics that
testimony.
provide abortion health care.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to testify here today. My name is Steve Crampton.
Who's us?
I serve as senior counsel for the Thomas More Society, a national nonprofit law firm championing life, family, and freedom. I applaud this
And
committee
bullshit.
for addressing this vital issue. As the title of this subcommittee suggests, the Constitution
leave the lies.
and limited government,
It'll work.
both of which are keenly implicated in this issue. FACE should be repealed, as Ms. Hawley just said, for one, because it's an unconstitutional law, and second, because it's an unnecessary federal overreach into a matter traditionally and best left to the states. I also urge this committee, however, to take action regarding the use and abuse of the Ku Klux Klan Conspiracy Against Rights statute, passed in 1870, which has, for the first time in our nation's
Hi,
history,
it's the
been pressed into
hearing
service for
to
use
repeal
against
the
these
FACE
peaceful
Act, which
FACE
is the
protesters.
act that protects
People
like
Mr. Vaughn and
birthing
the others,
centers
many of
as
whom,
well
as
as
has been mentioned, are
churches
already in
and
jail
abortion
today,
clinics and other
face that
things.
penalty
The
that
Republicans
goes
are
up from
mad
6
because they're
months
getting in
for a
trouble
first
more
offense
often than the
nonviolent face
Democrats
violation
are.
to
And they don't
10
like it.
years in the federal
And so they
penitentiary.
want them to
This is an
repeal it.
outrage,
So now
and
this
it
is the
should
Thomas
not be
More
permitted.
Society guy. Yep. And
Historically,
guess who else is
FACE
here,
was
gal?
always about
That's
one
right.
thing,
Mrs.
abortion.
Erin Hawley.
The legislative history.
Oh, it's a
the
bingo.
Drafts of the early bill make this quite clear, as does the use
What it
and
really
abuse
is
of the FACE
Jim
Act
Jordan's
throughout its 30
final
years' history.
masturbation session.
Moreover, FACE purports to prohibit intimidation of people on the basis of their views on abortion. whichever
She would.
side they might
She
take.
better.
But the weaponized Department of Justice and its Gestapo-like FBI are
She
using
runs or
FACE
she represents
itself
the
to
family
intimidate and silence
defense of
pro-life
families.
advocates.
What's that gal?
It is the
defense of
government, not the peaceful
something?
advocates like Paul Vaughn.
family
who are doing the
defense council
intimidating.
or something.
Furthermore, since the historic Dobbs decision, June
I don't know if she runs
2022,
it, but she,
reversing Roe, there's no
she
longer
works
any
for it.
pretense of abortion being a federal right. Because the reason for the law has ceased to exist, FACE itself should cease to exist. It should be repealed.
Whoa.
But instead of the DOJ
That's what.
lessening
That's
its
what I
use of the
meant.
FACE
Alliance
Act
defending
after
freedom.
Dobbs,
Whatever.
what the Biden administration has done is increase dramatically, perhaps 100-fold, its application. Only after Dobbs was decided did they begin rounding up pro-lifers all around the country for incidents that had occurred years before Dobbs was even decided, and they've thrown the proverbial book at them. Many of these peaceful pro-lifers will spend Christmas next week away from their families, behind bars in the federal penitentiary, simply because they peacefully sought to interpose on behalf of helpless babies facing a most horrific and violent dismembering and death by abortion.
I don't want
And
Christmas
while those
to
who
go
sought
away, Mr. Crampton.
to protect babies in any means now are at risk under this administration,
Wait, what?
regardless of their
More
proximity
babies?
to an abortion clinic.
More babies.
Pro-abortion
More
zealots
babies are in
who
trouble.
firebomb churches
Oh,
and pregnancy
Mr.
resource
Crampton.
centers are left free
You're
to carry on their campaign of terror
Ebenezer
at will,
Scrooge.
even though churches and the PRCs are theoretically protected under
The
FACE.
PRC's involved? Is the
Moreover,
Republic
FACE was carefully
of
crafted
China?
from its inception to criminalize
Republic
only
of
one
China
side of the
is
abortion
involved
debate,
too?
namely the pro-life side.
Oh my God.
This viewpoint bias in FACE is seen all too clearly when contrasting the cases of two of our clients, Mark Houck, who was already mentioned here, and Mark Crosby.
was all the marks.
Subcommittee
A
heard
lot
from
of
Mark
marks.
Houck, how he was arrested at gunpoint
Yeah.
by his wife and children.
Scary.
Ended up facing several
7
years
children,
in the
by
federal
the way.
penitentiary for
Busy.
2 violations
Yeah.
were charged to face. Thankfully, he won at trial, but only
Yeah,
after going
okay,
through the
that's
entire process.
Yay, justice.
But contrast that case
Yeah.
with that of Mark Crosby, 73-year-old
Hold my
pro-life
beer.
advocate, brutally beaten on
Ah.
May 26, 2023,
Wow.
by a
Did he
pro-abortion
pick a
zealot
fight?
outside a Planned Parenthood clinic in Baltimore,
Was he an
Maryland.
asshole?
Although
Did he
Mr. Crosby
deserve it?
offers counseling on so-called
I mean,
reproductive health
what'd
services,
he do?
should otherwise qualify for protection under FACE.
But what'd he
Guess
do?
what? His assailant is free from any FACE
But
prosecution.
what'd he do?
Because
Sir,
they
was
carefully
it a
defined
fight? Like,
what constitutes a reproductive
what?
health
Was he
service.
just walking by?
and
Was he walking to the Dunkin' Donuts on
counseling
the
protected
corner and all of a
thereunder
sudden,
to be
kapow?
connected only to a facility. Because Mr. Crosby is on the sidewalk, he got no protection.
No.
What we have
Dang
here
it!
is an out-of-control Department of Justice.
Maybe he shouldn't have
The
been
rule
on
of
the
law mentioned
sidewalk.
by Ms. Hawley has suffered,
How about
and
that?
it may prove to be a mortal wound. This two-tiered system of justice must end. Thank you. I
It
look
will.
forward to your
We're not
questions.
going to have any system of
Thank
justice
you, Mr.
about
Crampton.
January 20th, so
Crampton.
don't worry about it.
Professor Waters, you may offer your testimony.
Chairman Roy, Ranking Member Scanlon, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify today. We are here to discuss the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, otherwise known as FACE. The specific provisions of FACE are detailed in my written testimony, but in brief, FACE created criminal penalties and civil remedies against specific types of conduct, not speech. That conduct includes the use of violence or threats of violence directed at people providing or
that's
obtaining
good.
reproductive health services or
Mr.
seeking to
Krampus.
exercise their First Amendment religious rights at houses of worship. It prohibits physically obstructing the entrances to facilities that provide those services, and it prohibits damaging those facilities. Importantly, only if these acts were undertaken in order to injure, intimidate, or interfere with someone seeking to obtain or provide the before-listed services. I want to make 3 brief points about the impetus for FACE and why Congress found it necessary
Who's
to
the world's
implement a
most
federal
interesting
remedy.
man behind her?
First, as I detailed in my written testimony, there was clear evidence of escalating violence against reproductive health clinics and providers. As was summarized in the House Judiciary Report on FACE between 1977 to April 1993, so right before FACE was enacted, there were more than 1,000 acts of violence against providers of reproductive health services in the United States. And these acts were serious ones. They included 36 bombings, 81 arsons, 131 death threats, 84 assaults, 2 kidnappings, 327 clinic invasions, 1 murder, and over 6,000 clinic blockades and other disruptions. And
Which
while
is
at the
why
time
they
of
get
this
charged
passage,
more.
The documented surge in nationwide interstate violence was against providers and clinics that provided abortion care. Congress wisely made the deliberate decision to protect any reproductive health service facility or reproductive health service provider, regardless of whether they provide abortion care. My second point is that FACE was needed because existing state laws and remedies were demonstrably inadequate to protect providers and patients. The June 1993 Senate Committee report on FACE made clear findings on this point, noting several reasons why state remedies were inadequate. First, the patchwork of state laws made it impossible to address unlawful conduct that spanned across state lines. State penalties were often insignificant, thus not providing a deterrent effect. States weren't resourced to respond to the numerous blockades and were, as the Senate report on FACE stated, quote, frequently overwhelmed by the sheer number of blockades. And 4, unfortunately, some state law enforcement entities and officers were simply unwilling to enforce state laws against people attempting to, in their view, stop abortions. My third point is that there is a sound constitutional basis for FACE. Congress relied on
That's an
both the
excellent point,
Commerce Clause of the Constitution as well as Section 5 of the 14th Amendment and developed an extensive record in support of both. In support of Commerce Clause authority, the record showed that reproductive health providers are involved in interstate commerce, both directly and indirectly, by things like purchasing medical supplies and equipment across state lines, that their patients engage in interstate commerce by traveling from one state to another to obtain services, that clinic employees travel across state lines to work, and that the conduct that FACE addressed directly negatively affects interstate commerce by, for example, forcing clinics to cease operating. Indeed, every U.S. Circuit Court that has considered the issue has found that the FACE Act is a constitutional exercise of Congress's authority under the Commerce Clause. I note these 3 points because they hold true today and speak to the need for continued enforcement of FACE. The statistics for 2022 show an increase in major incidents like arson, burglaries, death threats, and clinic invasions. There was also a sharp increase in violence and disruption in states that are protective of abortion rights. It is plain that many of us differ on questions of the legality and morality of abortion. I'm under no illusions about that as I sit here. But where I do hope we do not differ is in our condemnation for vandalism, violence, threats against any reproductive health care facility, whether it is a pro-life facility, an IVF clinic, or a facility that offers comprehensive ranges of services, including abortion. People should be able to seek medical care, and medical professionals should be able to go to work and provide it without fear of assault, invasions, blockades, or murder. And this is an issue that warrants a federal remedy. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Waters. We will now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions, and I recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Mr. Crampton, I take it you represent Mr. Vaughn. I've had occasion to look at the Sixth Circuit's opinion, or a panel's opinion there from November 24. Hang on one second. There we go. On I guess, an application to stay his sentence, and it, of course, went against you, Mr. Vaughn. But I find this piece to be very interesting at the heart of what I believe to be the issue here. It says that you presented a study by the Crime Prevention Research Center which identified 135 attacks on pro-life churches and pregnancy resource centers compared to only 6 attacks on abortion clinics since the date of Dobbs, and that Mr. Vaughn's argument to the court was that under the FACE Act, the Department of Justice has prosecuted only 2 people under the FACE Act for attacking pregnancy resource centers, while prosecuting 26 pro-life activists under the same statute. And here's where it gets very interesting, having just read this. It says, but most of the incidents in the CPRC study appear to allege vandalism in potential violation of one subsection of the FACE Act, rather than obstruction in violation of another subsection, which is what Vaughn was prosecuted for.
Yay, SB, I'm glad you're here.
Could exercise its discretion to prosecute obstruction rather than vandalism without violating the Equal Protection Clause.
Oh, wow. Or that
Now,
must
as I
have been
just ran
incredibly
across it,
frightening.
I've been practicing law a long time. Well, I practiced till I got here. And that may...
And now what?
I guess I get the distinction being drawn, but when you consider that vandalism against pregnancy resource centers usually, almost always itself, is conveying a threat of force for people who may subscribe to the services of that clinic, there's no distinction whatsoever between those acts. And for the Department of Justice to exercise discretion to prosecute one and not the other, based apparently on the ideology of the person who's engaged in those acts.
No, actually, it's probably just good old-fashioned
an
jurisprudence.
example of
Oh, I
selective
didn't mean to keep
prosecution
the
that the
lies up
Constitution
during
would
that
not
last
allow.
woman's. I'm so sorry.
So that's
I'm
a stunning.
not paying
What about that,
attention.
Mr. Crampton? Do I have that wrong?
I think you have that exactly right, Mr. Congressman. The further distinction is, as you suggest, I would argue the vandalism actions are of a more serious nature than a sit-in. Moreover, they were more recent. Mr. Vaughn's actions took place in 2021. Those acts of vandalism took place in 2023 and 2024. So it's a very puzzling distinction that the court drew there.
To Professor Waters' point, I do not disagree that we don't want people engaged in violence around abortion clinics or pregnancy resource centers. It should be condemned and it should be punished appropriately. But I just wonder, Professor Waters, when you see these things where SWAT teams are going out to the homes of people because they've engaged in a nonviolent act of what I understand alleged here is a conspiracy to block access for an hour that denied one person, one patient and one employee access.
Really? Is that okay then? If it's just one person, is it okay?
Troubling that
Is that what
you
it
got
is, Mr.
guns
Bishop?
drawn and pointed at a man's head and his children arrested in the side yard or stopped in the side. Doesn't that seem, I
Was
mean,
his
we're in an
his
environment where we're
children
always talking
arrested?
about police
Wait a
officers
minute,
should
this story's
de-escalate
getting
in the
taller and
context of-
taller. This tale,
What justifies that,
this
Professor
shaggy
Waters?
dog
Does that
story's
disturb you?
getting bigger and bigger and bigger every time.
Thank you for the question. So, I will say, as a human, listening to Mr. Vaughn speak, it sounds like that was a terrifying day, and I'm not going to dispute his experience of that. I do not work for the DOJ. I am not involved in prosecutions brought by the
And
DOJ.
I'm not trying to make you assign responsibility. I'm just
appreciate
asking
that.
for a simple, are there things we can agree on? And it seems to me that, and I'll just leave it at this, Professor Waters, it just seems, because I think it's a very simple thing. I don't understand, and we've seen it in so many ways. It is the fundamental part of this weaponization, and I was going to yield all my time to Mr. Biggs, but I got carried away. I just don't, the American people see these incidents.
Well, Andy's not going to like that.
They seem to be made for CNN.
Be
when
prepared for a
people of
towel
certain
snap
political
in the
persuasions or
House
ideas
locker room.
are just targeted. The SWAT team goes out and raids them in their homes, and it's totally disproportionate.
Ooh, that's a
That
burn and a half there.
must
Oomph. Did they
stop.
militarize the police
And I'll
with their war on
guarantee you it
terror
is going to
budgets and
stop in the
extras
next
expressly so
administration.
that they could then
Got 15 seconds
complain
for you,
about
Mr. Biggs.
said militarized
Thank you,
police?
Mr. Chairman. So for
That's
that reason,
it.
I
Bingo.
won't even engage in a diatribe or ask questions, but I will ask that the May 5th, 1994 congressional record from the House, page 9409, Mr. DeLay's speech about this, the FACE Act passage, be admitted to the record.
With my apologies and without objection, so ordered, and I now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes of question. Oh, I'm taking your pardon. Who am I going to recognize? Oh, I see. Mr. Nadler is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Vaughn says he wasn't acting violently, he was acting peacefully. Quote, sitting in abortion providers' doors, unquote. In other words, blocking access. In other words, violating the FACE Act, which is the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act. He was convicted of a crime by a jury of his peers because of that. He also said, or some of the witnesses said, abortion laws have been returned to the states, and so should enforcement. Abortion laws have been returned to the states, but enforcement in those states where abortion is still legal is a federal responsibility. Professor Waters, has any federal court post-Dobbs considered the question of whether the FACE Act is constitutional? And if so, what did the court hold?
Good one, Jerry.
Thank you for the question. It's important to point out that every federal court pre-Dobbs that has considered the constitutionality of the FACE Act, whether it is a First Amendment challenge or a Commerce Clause challenge, has held that the FACE Act is constitutional. To my knowledge, there is one court that post-Dobbs has directly addressed the question of whether the FACE Act is constitutional, and that was actually in Mr. Vaughn's case. So the district court, the federal district court, in that case, on a motion to dismiss, held very squarely that in accordance with the prior precedent from many circuits, the FACE Act was constitutional and found that it was a valid exercise of Congress's Commerce Clause authority and also did not pose First Amendment.
Thank you. How would you describe the effect that state abortion bans have had on interstate commerce, such as on the transit of persons across state lines?
Yeah, it's somewhat ironic. When we think about a post-Dobbs world, what that has created is more interstate commerce. We know that in 13 states, abortion is almost completely unavailable. And we know that that means that a person, a woman who is seeking abortion care now needs to travel. We know that the rates of people traveling to receive abortion care have risen dramatically. 1 in 5 patients who seek abortion care now have to travel across state lines. That does not, what that does is increase expenses for that woman.
20%?
She has to take more time off. She has from work. She has to be away from her family. She has to pay the travel expenses that it takes to cross state lines, and that pushes pregnancies later, right? So the impact, ironically, in a post-Dobbs world is more impact on interstate commerce.
Thank you. In 1993, during testimony before this committee, the field director of the anti-abortion group Operation Rescue, when asked whether the purpose of violent and threatening activity by some anti-abortion activists was to deny women access to abortion services, testified, and I quote, "We may not get laws changed or be able to change people's minds, but if there's no one willing to conduct abortions, there are no abortions." if there is no one willing to
went to
conduct
sleep
abortions.
at like 10:30 last
Are you concerned that today's evident joint effort by congressional
That was pretty
Republicans and
early.
anti-abortion extremists to repeal the FACE Act or to have it declared unconstitutional is another step in a campaign to intimidate abortion providers
like
in
7
states
hours
where
of
the right
sleep.
to an
That's
abortion
pretty
remains
good.
protected?
I am concerned. I appreciate the statements of multiple members that they don't condone violence, and I'm sure that is true. Unfortunately, there are people out there who will engage in violent activity, and the statement you just read is a prime example of it. I do think that what we are operating in now is a climate of fear. Medical professionals fear liability. They fear being able to do their jobs up to existing standards of medical care. And without protections like those provided in FACE, they fear for their own safety and they fear going to work. So I do agree that we are in a climate of fear and uncertainty, and I think that is deliberate, and I think reversing the protections that we have will only add to that.
In other words, repealing the FACE Act would add to violence.
It is very possible that it would.
Thank you. I yield back.
Ranking member.
I just wanted to seek unanimous consent to enter the two opinions that were mentioned. The Tennessee District Court's order and memo opinion denying Mr. Vaughn and his co-defendants joint motion to dismiss, that's U.S. v. Gallagher, and the 2002 Sixth Circuit decision in Norton versus Ashcroft.
Without objection.
Thank you.
And with that, I would recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley.
Mrs. Hawley, I'm from California. Would it surprise you to learn that there are pregnancy centers in my region that have had to invest significantly in security measures because of the multiplicity of threats against them?
It would not at all.
And they've also been the subject of hostile
God, I hate
legislation
this
from
guy.
our state legislature. One law was even struck down
Yeah,
by the U.S.
because you
Supreme
guys are
Court as a
annoying.
violation of the First Amendment. And of course, we've been
Go
talking
to
about
Kansas
the
or
ways in which
wherever
the
it
Biden
is that you
administration has turned
think
a
you
blind eye
can
to
exist.
hostile and potentially even violent actions
Nobody
against
likes
these
you.
centers. So, gosh, they've been subject to attacks and to hostility at the state and
Gosh.
federal level. There must be really nefarious things going on at these places. Could you tell us about some of what goes on there that might be sparking this outrage?
Sure. So pregnancy care centers are a strange target for ire. Pregnancy care centers are there when no one else is. We know from women who have had abortions that the majority of them say they would have chosen to parent or chosen differently if they would have had additional resources, either financial or familial support. Pregnancy care centers are there to provide that support when they can. They provide financial resources, they provide material resources like car seats and baby blankets, clothes, financial resources, food, housing, job training, resume training, as well as parenting classes. In 2022, they provided almost $360 million worth of goods and services to moms and families facing unexpected pregnancies. Again, a strange target.
A very strange target. I mean, they're giving away diapers, they're giving away wipes, they're giving away baby formula. That's outrageous, isn't it, that they're just giving it away? I mean, what is driving this? It's really incredible that these centers that provide such critical services to people who are in need have been left in a position where they have to spend their own limited resources putting up a security fence or something like that in order to protect folks who go there. But on a separate note, in terms of the law here, is there any precedent for a law that, at least on its face, is neutral to be challenged on First Amendment grounds based upon this idea of selective enforcement? What would that look like, and has that been attempted here?
Absolutely. There's a number of cases in federal court. I would point you to the Frederick Douglass Foundation case decided unanimously by a D.C. Circuit panel a year or two ago. And in that case, there was a ordinance against writing on public streets here in the District of Columbia. And the court allowed that to go forward on the claim that it had been unequally enforced against pro-life advocates and other advocates.
Very interesting. Perhaps something to look at. And thank you very much for your testimony. I'll yield the remainder of my time to my colleague from Arizona, Mr. Biggs.
I thank the gentleman. Mrs. Hawley, have there been increases of attacks against pregnancy resource centers during the Biden administration?
Absolutely. We've had almost 100 attacks since the Dobbs decision was leaked in May of 2022.
Not that
Are you
I've seen,
concerned
Kat.
that pro-abortion extremists will continue to attack pregnancy resource centers?
I think that's a concern. We just heard from the gentleman from California about pregnancy care centers who are having to build security fences, hire security guards. That's something that is now commonplace for centers that provide resources to women.
Thank you. Mr. Vaughn, would you characterize the events in Mount Juliet, Tennessee as violent?
Absolutely not.
Did you or anyone with you pose a physical threat to the people around you?
Absolutely not.
Was there anything you did or said that could cause someone to think their life was immediately in danger or harm?
Absolutely not.
So to be clear, you were not a threat to anyone around you?
That's correct.
But when the FBI came to serve your indictment, they raided your house and arrested you at gunpoint in front of your family.
That is correct.
And you know why they did that, right?
Griffey!
It was to intimidate you.
Griffey.
Sure.
Griffey.
But it wasn't just to intimidate
Griffey.
you and your
Griffey.
family. It was to
Hey, girl.
intimidate any other pro-life activist in this country. That
I also
is the
want to start
disproportionality
organizing an
that has
IRL
resulted
group
from the
to
disproportionate
do
impact
the walk
or the
in
enforcement of the FACE
the
Act.
march in
And
January,
so
the
you
People's
were
March.
at the brunt of that.
I don't know if anyone
This
wants to
regime
get together.
is going to attack anyone that has disparate
But I would like to
beliefs
I would like
from
to make it a
them. That's why
dino
they've
march.
Gone after Catholics. That's why they've spied on parents at school boards. It's a tactic they've employed for the last
I got
4 years
extra
against
dino
conservatives
suits.
of
You
any
know I
stripe.
do. Yeah, there's a
Criminal
People's
terrorists,
March. It used to be
illegal
called the
aliens.
Women's March, but
Let
gratefully
them in. Give them free
they're
housing and other
charging.
benefits.
They changed it to
Conservative
People's
pro-life
March.
Americans
It's
exercising
all
their
over the
First Amendment
country.
rights. Send the
So there'll
SWAT
be
team to
places
their
and
house.
there'll be marches in
That's
different
clear
cities.
political
So that's
intimidation,
what I'm wondering.
And that's
is
why
if,
the FACE Act has
is
to
there
be
any
repealed,
world in which
Mr.
we all
Chairman
get
Neal.
together in
Thank you,
a
gentlemen.
closer,
Thank you,
some of
gentleman
us
from Arizona. Thank you,
regionally
gentleman
get
from
in
California
like
for
a
yielding time.
California
Gentleman from
city to
Arizona.
do it together?
Unlike
I
my
don't
good
know.
friend from North
Nobody's
Carolina.
going after Catholics. Nobody gives
Parting
a
shot
shit.
on the way out of the committee.
Are you kidding me?
But with that, I would yield 5 minutes to the gentlelady from Texas, Mrs. Escobar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the witnesses for their testimony before the committee today. We are closing out business in the House Judiciary Committee this Congress with a hearing that's meant to set the stage for the continued hostility we can expect next Congress toward reproductive health care.
I was thinking, Jen, we could meet in the
Undermining
middle.
abortion access across the country since the fall of Roe, my colleagues across the aisle continue their attacks on the right
Yay,
to
Kim.
safely seek reproductive care in this country. Let's remember that the reason the FACE Act was enacted at all was in direct response to escalating violence by the anti-abortion movement on abortion patients, clinic employees, and providers.
Sorry, terrible with the
And I
graphics.
wanna
That
be
producer
very
is
clear. I
fired.
stand firmly against all violence. I don't condone any threats or intimidation. I introduced the Healthcare Providers Safety Act earlier this Congress, which would amend the Public Health Service Act to authorize grants to healthcare providers to enhance the physical and cyber security of their facilities, personnel, and patients. My bill would give providers the needed resources to ensure the safety of patients and that providers are able to continue providing essential reproductive health care. Reproductive health care providers, patients, and facilities are frequently the targets of violence and harassment, ranging from vandalism to online harassment to stalking, arson, and deadly attacks. Our providers deserve to care for patients, and patients deserve access to abortion care in safe environments. Ms. Waters, how can Congress build on the protections created by the FACE Act, and what steps can Congress take to improve or strengthen protections for patients and providers? And what other effective, or are there other effective methods to combat routine harassment and violence like the kind experienced by providers and patients at healthcare
I would imagine,
clinics?
Paul. I feel like it has that kind of energy.
So I
I
think
don't
it is
know.
important to note that while FACE does provide an important federal remedy that I would argue to your question that Congress needs to zealously protect, it does not preclude states from also enforcing remedies in their own state, right? So we need both of those things, and we can hold both things. Both things can be true, right? So I think it's incredibly important that Congress send the message that if someone is providing legal health care, which abortion providers and other medical professionals are in the majority of the states, they will be protected. They don't have to fear liability. They don't have to fear violence. They don't have to change their medical practice to try to comply with ever-changing laws. That's a message that Congress can send.
I want to tell a very quick story to give voice to a number of constituents who reached out to me after the reversal of Roe. I heard story after story about women who were forced to terminate pregnancies because of the lack of viability of the fetus. And many of these constituents had to access their care at a clinic. And as they were mourning the loss of a child they badly wanted, but a fetus that if they carried to full term would threaten their own life, creating motherless children in their family, they had to walk. I heard stories about women having to walk past crowds of people screaming at them with photos that they did not want to see in that moment as they were trying to save their own life and be around for their other children, and could not adequately even mourn the loss of their baby's life because they were spiraling into shame because of what was about to happen. I think it's really important that these women's stories be uplifted, which is why I wanted to share it with all of you today. Ms. Waters, thank you so much for your response. I appreciate it. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady from Texas. I would now recognize the gentlelady from Wyoming for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wyoming's lone facility performing procedural abortions opened last year in Casper.
Oh, no.
On a routine basis, pro-life Wyomingites pray, hold vigils, and participate in advocacy activities outside of the clinic. Advocacy to the clinic patients sometimes involves giving a woman a rose and informing them of alternative services offered at crisis pregnancy centers. Local reporting suggests that clinic employees are now claiming that this peaceful advocacy is harassment of patients and employees. The clinic is now escorting all of their patients to and from the building in response to these peaceful actions. And earlier this year, one of the clinic's escorts actually pleaded no contest and paid a fine for assaulting a member of the pro-life protest group. There is now an attempt to elevate the harassment allegations to the local government. Mr. Vaughn, does the situation in Casper, Wyoming that I just described sound similar to your case?
It does.
And do you think prayer and peaceful advocacy are violations of the law, or are they instead activities that are secured by the First Amendment to the United States Constitution?
They are both First Amendment protected activities and activities of love and seeking to help others.
Have you experienced these attempted mischaracterizations of your peaceful activities as being criminal or violent?
Is that what they're calling it now?
Right here in this very hearing.
We heard it just today from the member of the ranking member on the Judiciary Committee. Could you please explain and clarify what happened in your circumstance?
Thank you for the opportunity. I was not sitting at any door. I was not standing in any door. At no time did I block anyone. My only activities were praying.
Really?
And
Where?
talking with the police officers and relaying messages back and forth between the two parties.
Where were you?
Okay. And do you think that the
Where'd you do
pro-abortion
that?
individuals who seek to misrepresent lawful
Nope, I
activity
need more
as violence,
context.
that they're doing so because
Harriet.
of the current administration's misapplication and unequal enforcement of the FACE Act?
I think there's an element of that. I think as a nation, we need to be able to communicate. And as long as we sit here looking at each other face to face and we're not able to communicate and honestly represent facts, what hope is there for the news to get actually out to the people at the clinics? And I would just add that the people going and seeking abortion, as Ms. Escobar told her story, that is a tragic thing. And if they stopped and talked to someone out at the clinic, what they will find is loving help and people that would take them to a crisis pregnancy center or offer some other solution to help if it's possible. And if it's not, then they would find someone that might pray with them and encourage them. But they would not find someone, if they stopped and engaged in a conversation and actually listened, someone yelling or screaming or abusing them verbally. and certainly
Oh,
not
go
physically.
fuck yourself.
You know, those who hate wisdom love death.
Keep your fucking dick in
And I
your
think that that's
pants,
part of
Mr.
what we're
Seven
dealing with
Kids.
here.
Jesus
and I think
Christ.
that goes, Ms. Holly, to your statement
kids
about
are
how
dumb,
you find
too.
it so utterly bizarre that crisis
I'm trying to see if I can
pregnancy centers have
find
been the
his,
target of protests and
face
activities
thing.
and
I
vandalism.
think I've got it.
When all it is that they're offering services and support to individuals in need. And I'm with you. I
Yeah,
think it's
I
such a
got it.
bizarre target, but I think it demonstrates that this isn't necessarily a discussion about the FACE Act or the First Amendment or protecting constitutional
Vaughn,
rights.
this is an
or civil
appeals court
liberties.
ruling,
I think that there is
so
a
forgive me if it's
pro-abortion agenda that has been
not the most
pursued,
current.
especially by this administration, that doesn't make sense. And
But
I
that
think
should
that
be
the
the,
abuse of the
that
FACE
should be
Act
the
is
filing.
an attempt to criminalize
Those who hate
the
liberty
free thought
love
and
death.
the
Wait,
ability
what?
for people to, as you say, peacefully protest.
Oh, no, those who love liberty
it's a sad
hate
day
death.
In America
No, wait,
when
what?
someone who is praying or attempting to
What kind of death?
have that kind of a conversation that you're
Are we talking
describing
like,
can be arrested years later for that behavior.
Bergman type death, you know, the guy with the size?
Based on your experience with the FACE
What are we
Act,
talking?
Mrs. Holly, do you think that the pro-abortion community is aware that the Biden-Harris administration is selectively applying the FACE Act against the pro-life community?
So I think it probably
not.
is, and I would point you
It
to
probably
several,
is. I don't know.
press
It's a
conferences
feeling
that
I
the
have.
Attorney
I'm not going
General
on
Gupta held.
data.
She
It probably
announced just,
is.
a short time after the Dobbs decision was released, a reproductive task force, and noted that one of the goals of that reproductive task force during their daily meeting would be to seek out opportunities for FACE enforcement. And of course, that FACE enforcement would have been against pro.
Look at the girl behind her. Yeah, that's right.
Is praying outside an abortion facility or offering women information on alternative pathways and options for their pregnancy a violation of the FACE Act?
It
Yes,
should not be, no.
yes.
And to
No,
your
it is,
knowledge,
though.
Would that violate any federal law, what I
Yes.
just described?
Yes,
Not consistent with
Yes.
the First Amendment, no.
yes, yes.
The Biden administration
Yes.
makes it appear as if the FACE
You could be
Act is merely a
trespassed.
statute covering abortion facilities, but in reality, it also prohibits certain acts against places of religious worship. Isn't that correct?
Boy, Republicans, you really pick
So
and
has
choose the
current
laws you want to
administration, Attorney
follow.
General
That's kind
Garland
of
or
funny.
Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clark
And I don't know
prioritize
what
protecting
Crystal
religious
Carrington
places of
sitting
worship,
behind Harriet
especially in the wake
Hageman
of
has
the
going on
anti-Semitic
later, but it
violence
looks
which
like
has
it's
occurred
probably going to
in the
be a
wake of
pretty
October
lit
7th?
And the gentlelady's
cocktail
question time
party.
has expired, so you may answer the question, and then we'll move on.
Thank you, sir. Not at all. The Family Research Council identified 436 attacks on churches and houses of worship just in 2023.
When somebody looked
There have
askance
been
at one of them,
zero prosecutions
That
under
was
the FACE
one.
Act for that violence and
Thank-
threats.
and those are
Well,
just the
thank
ones
you,
we
and
caught
Thank you for your indulgence.
on security
That I yield
camera.
back.
I thank the gentlelady. I'll now recognize the gentlelady from Vermont for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. I know you're all very busy people. Before I get to
Well, except
my
for the criminal
statement
on the
topic at hand, I have to start by saying, you know, words absolutely matter. And Mr. Compton, earlier, you likened the
Mr.
FBI
Krampus.
to the Gestapo, to Nazis. And that kind of rhetoric is not actually helpful in this debate. The Gestapo operated without any civil restraints.
Oh, lady, they
Its
hate it when you
actions
bring
were
up the
not subject to
Nazis.
judicial appeal.
Dang it.
Thousands of citizens, including Jews, trade unionists, political clergy, and others, simply disappeared into concentration camps, one of those being my grandfather. The political arm of the Gestapo could order prisoners to be maimed, tortured, murdered. There was no legal process. And the Gestapo, under Adolf Eichmann, organized the deportation of millions and millions of Jews to concentration camps. Now, I understand that you feel passionately about this issue. I do, I understand that. But your use of the word Gestapo is inappropriate, it's offensive, and it's uneducated. And I urge you, as you continue your work, to cease using this terminology. Because I think what we're trying to do here is actually elicit testimony that is helpful to get us to a better place. And I don't think that that is helping. Professor Waters, if the Justice Department were to stop enforcing the FACE Act, or if it were no longer law, could you describe for people, because that's really what these hearings are about, describe for people what effect that would have on access to abortion care and other reproductive rights?
I think it is important to note that if the FACE Act were no longer enforced, many of the institutions and many of the organizations that the colleagues to the left of me have described, they would also be at risk, right? I don't quite understand the argument that we think that the DOJ and the FBI should be doing more to protect pro-life centers, but at the same time, we should repeal FACE.
Agreed.
Doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
This confuses me too.
Yeah, and I do think, but the record is also very clear that we have seen a campaign of coordinated violence and blockades against centers and providers of reproductive health care, including abortion. And without these federal protections, that would only increase. I also think it's really important that we are precise in how we talk about FACE's protections. And FACE very clearly does not reach peaceful protest outside of clinics that does not interfere with passage into that clinic. That is not covered under FACE. In fact, it is explicitly excluded.
Can you say that again? Please, honestly, this is like the crux of it for me.
It's an important point. Congress was very deliberate in carving out pure expressive activity from FACE's purview. So some of the activities that have been described here, like peacefully protesting outside of a clinic, and even having signs that may be inflammatory, as much as we may abhor that speech, the First Amendment likely protects that. And it's important to distinguish between what FACE does and protections under the First Amendment.
So it is the blocking of the entrance. It is making it difficult to get the care that they are entitled to.
It is violence, it is destruction of property, it is blocking of entrances that is prohibited by FACE. FACE does not prohibit expressive speech.
And from your perspective, are clinic obstructions, even if they don't lead to threats of violence, like, of course, we want to avoid violence, are they related to negative health outcomes? Have we seen increased mortality since Dobbs was overturned?
We have seen increased both maternal mortality rates and infant mortality rates. And probably not surprisingly, those are going up very quickly in states that are most restrictive of abortion care.
I thank you. I yield back.
I think the gentlelady from Vermont, I'm going to use the time for myself now.
Don't
Mr.
do it,
Crampton,
Chip. Don't do
You just have
it.
some questions directed to you. I want to give you a chance to respond very quickly because I want to move on to the rest of the questions.
Nope,
I would
don't.
note also that only 42 of my Democratic colleagues saw to it to join with us to sanction the International Criminal Court, which is trying to say that Prime Minister Netanyahu is somehow a war criminal.
That's because they
for
disagree with
defending his
you.
country against the vicious attacks
That's
from
because they
Iran,
disagree with you.
from Hamas, from Hezbollah, and all of those
No,
that
it's
are trying
because
to
he's a
target the
corrupt
Jewish state.
individual
Do you
and
have
a war
anything quickly
criminal.
to respond to
That's
the
why.
attacks?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity. I would point the gentlelady to the facts as testified to
he's
by
going
Mr.
to
Vaughn.
defend. He's going to double
Here
down on the
comes people,
Gestapo
guns
comment. Here we
drawn,
go.
Banging on his door as he described it, and it's not an unfair characterization. He was kidnapped at gunpoint before his wife and children. No authority
No one
given.
is kidnapped
even
by
when he
the
asked
FBI.
directly. They
That's
just
not how
point
that
to
works.
a little sticker
Krampus.
on the vest saying that's all the authority you're going to get that says FBI.
Mr. Vaughn, can you just add to that real quick? I mean, you know, the phraseology was used intentionally by Mr. Crampton. We're talking about the Federal Bureau of Investigation showing up to your home in front of your 11
That
children.
doesn't, it's, you
with
know
a
what? His
weapon
perspective isn't
pointed
it.
at you
Sorry.
for what you did in terms of praying.
I'm so sorry.
Your
That's not
activity
the
in
way
an
it
abortion
works.
clinic. Is that true?
That is absolutely true.
Do you think that is an appropriate use of the power of the federal government against you?
Oh my
Absolutely
God.
not. I'm in the local
Now the
business,
country
and
will
I've been
start
there for
bitching when
17
egg
years
and
in the
chicken
community. A
prices
phone
go up.
call
By
I would
then we can
happily
blame
talk to.
Dawn.
And does that
He
not
has 7
invoke the kinds
children,
of images
I
Mr.
think.
Crampton's talking about?
Now does he have 11? Did he have
previous,
4 additional children
examples
while
in
this
history
hearing
in
was
terms of
going
the
on?
fascism that we see
Holy
out
shit.
of Nazi Germany and how they
That guy
treated
is one
citizens?
virile
It absolutely does. And the
motherfucker.
gentlewoman said that there's recourse by law and that there's laws that oversee this. And I would like to ask.
You know what? I
for
don't
my
like his
13 and my
accent.
12-year-old and my 18-year-old daughter water that was out in the side yard, what recourse do they have at law for the abuse that they
I don't know.
handled
Why
at this
don't you
guy
ask
holding
the
them at bay right there?
children
And
of
also by the
George
same
Floyd?
Department
Why don't
of
you
the
ask
FBI
them?
in Tennessee that 2 months later shot a guy in his own living room.
And as a reminder,
An internal investigation. Who's investigating the investigators?
and as a reminder, Mr. Vaughn, you were there because, as I understand your position,
No,
you
did he
believe
have
life
4 new
begins at
children?
conception. You believe you're protecting and praying for life, correct?
That's absolutely
So your great sin, that the tyranny of the federal government was
No,
brought to bear
actually,
against
that's
you
not
at your
true.
home
And
with
the
a
real
weapon
issue
in front
here,
of your
Chippy
11
Chip,
children, was because you want to
Chipperty Chip
protect
Chip,
a human life.
was that
That is correct.
the Thomas
Hall.
More douchebag
Are you familiar with the history of this
said
act? Is it not true
Gestapo
that, the
when
current leader in the Senate, Mr.
assigning
Schumer,
or when describing the
was,
FBI,
lead
which
proponent
is
of the
an
FACE Act
agency
in
of the United
1993,
States
and
of
in questioning for
America.
Republican members of Congress,
So yeah,
when asked about whether or
she
not
had a
that this would
problem
be
with
used
that
against,
use
for
of that
example,
word,
we have
especially
3,
since
10,
her
12
family
people pro-life
history
on a sidewalk
is so
in front of the
closely
clinic.
tied to
People
that
could not get by.
pain.
Police came and lift them up, put them in a paddy wagon, take them away. Are they subject to a felony? Mr. Schumer said no. Yet here we are.
You guys
And
break the
shed
law
light
more
on the extent
often.
to
I'm
which
sorry
the
that
truth
that's
is,
true.
notwithstanding
Oh
what
my
Professor Waters
God.
said a minute ago, that what we're dealing with here
I knew this was
is
going to
the
be bad,
conflation
but
of
I'm
the
like, I have to
existing
watch it.
statutes and
What
things
is
that
the
go
girl
back to
wearing
the,
next to him? Is that
Ku Klux
literally
Klan
like a
Act,
Barbie doll
and
halter
that we now
top
have
that
a
she has
situation
on?
under the federal civil rights conspiracy
Can I
that
ask
they're
for a
blending these
minute? The
together
girl on his
to target people
right.
intentionally. That they're using this and targeting it intentionally.
She's
so that
wearing
they
like
can go
this
after
halter
people
top
punishable
with
by up to 10 years
fake pearls
in
and like
prison.
this
Can
fake
you add some
Chanel
context to
pink
that, Ms. Hall?
Barbie looking halter.
So
What the
FACE
fuck
Act
is that?
comes with several different sort of levels of punishment.
Oh my
For a
God.
first-time nonviolent offense, there's 6 months in jail. A subsequent nonviolent offense might get 18 months in jail. But if you tack on a conspiracy to violate civil rights, you get 10 years. And take Eva Edel. For sitting in her wheelchair, she was blocking the entrance, but sitting in the wheelchair, blocking the entrance, singing and praying hymns, she is subject to 11 years in federal prison and hundreds of $1,000s of fines.
And grandma's going to get run over by more than a reindeer. Here
So
we
what
go.
we're talking about here, as I mentioned to Mr. Vaughn. Mr. Vaughn, do you have something you wanted to add there?
Oh, wait, the girl. I want you
That
guys
Mr.
to see the
Vaughn
girl.
is facing this kind of persecution. He's not alone. We've talked about Ms. Idle.
It
And
does.
to be clear,
It's Liberty
this conflation of the
University
statute,
chic.
had that ever been done before, prior to Kristen Clark?
Not until the Biden administration, no.
So this administration took the unprecedented
But I was praying in a wheelchair when I
of
executed the
merging
board
these
of
together so they could have a
directors.
federal conspiracy to target very
Holly's going to
specific
get laid tonight.
pro-life activists.
Yeah.
So I think the numbers here speak for themselves.
He's gonna be
Again,
double-handed.
55 individuals have been subject to prosecution under the FACE Act. 50 of
And
those
she's
have been
real
pro-life.
excited.
There have been 26 FACE Act civil and criminal
I
prosecutions.
don't know why she's sitting in
Only
bed with
2 of
Roger
them
Stone and a
have been in
monkey, but
protection of pregnancy
okay.
centers.
And just to finish here, do you think that's an appropriate use of federal authority to say target Mr. Vaughn or say Ms. Idle, who had been in Yugoslavia and effectively gulags and now at 89 years old is being targeted by the government of the United States?
No, as John Adams would say, we are a government of laws, not of men. The Supreme Court has been clear that selective enforcement based on viewpoint is unconstitutional.
Well, thank
Look at her,
you
she's like-
for your testimony. I appreciate it. And with that, I will recognize the ranking member, Ms. Scanlon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor Waters, we seem to have conflated a lot of things here in suggesting that, inaccurately, that Mr. Vaughn was prosecuted for prayer. Can you noted in your testimony
Come on,
that
girl,
the FACE Act
let it out.
explicitly distinguishes between protected
Tell
expressive
Josh he just
speech and
finished with his
unlawful
wife.
conduct. And we've talked a lot about what's expressive speech, but the unlawful conduct includes things such as obstructing access to a clinic, does it not?
That's correct. FACE explicitly makes clear that obstructing access to a reproductive health services clinic or a place of worship is a violation of FACE.
And Mr. Chairman, I would like to have unanimous consent to introduce the press release when Mr. Vaughn was convicted, 6 defendants convicted of federal civil rights conspiracy and freedom of access to clinic entrance for obstructing access to reproductive health services in Tennessee.
Without objection.
And also a USA Today article saying Tennessee man arrested for blocking access to abortion clinic, not praying.
Without objection.
Thank you. Recent data, Ms. Waters, from the National Abortion Federation shows that violence and threats directed towards abortion providers and their patients have risen. Can you speak to this escalating trend, and particularly in light of this increasing threat to reproductive health services, does the FACE Act continue to be a relevant tool to protect doctors, nurses, patients, and volunteers who are seeking or providing abortion care?
It continues to be a relevant tool to protect anyone who is providing reproductive health care services, including abortion care. What we have seen is reports of escalating violence and more numerous violence, including things like blockades, happening particularly in states that are protective of abortion care. As I noted earlier, women seeking abortion care in many states now have to travel to states where abortion is legal and it is safe. And because they are having to engage in that traveling, I think there has been a deliberate campaign to target some of the clinics where abortion care is still available.
Well, and in fact, the case that Mr. Vaughn was involved in, although he
I love her.
purports to say that he was simply
I love her
praying, the jury
standing up to this
rejected his
douche.
argument and actually found him and his fellow protesters to have been guilty of actually obstructing folks in this clinic for a period of 3 hours. And the conspiracy element came from the fact that these folks came from all over. It was actually part of an organized effort in Tennessee where his incident occurred, as well as other places around the country. Is that correct?
It is my understanding that people traveled from several different jurisdictions and that there was indeed a conspiracy charge in this case.
We've also heard repeatedly
Can someone walk
that,
Professor Waters to her
basically
car,
there
please?
is not any enforcement or a blind eye being turned. I wanted to seek unanimous consent to introduce another DOJ press release just from a few months ago. 3 defendants plead guilty to civil rights conspiracy targeting pregnancy resource centers.
Without objection.
Okay. Finally, to the extent that our colleagues are concerned about excessive use of force, I mean, that's something that members on our side of the aisle have been very interested in preventing excessive use of force in a variety of contexts. But that's certainly not an issue exclusive to the FACE Act, and perhaps that's something we need to pursue on another day. So with that, I'd yield back.
I thank the ranking member, and with that, I will recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor
McClintock!
Waters mentioned the cases of violence and vandalism at abortion clinics that gave rise to the FACE Act, but I think she left out all of the cases of violence and vandalism that were directed at churches.
Gal
and
listens to a
pregnancy
lot of
centers.
gross stuff, so
And
we
that's
don't
what
have
convinced
to.
Congress to make FACE even-handed and to protect both sides of the controversy. Am I correct, Ms. Hawley?
That's absolutely correct. The plain text of the FACE Act applies to pregnancy centers.
To everybody of both sides. There's no right to impede a person's access to abortion clinics or pregnancy centers or churches or any other lawful pursuit. There's no right to vandalize those facilities or threaten to the people who use them. And there is every right to peaceably assemble to express one's political or religious beliefs.
Well, I guess that wasn't
So
the
I've got
facts of the
no
case,
problems
Mr.
with the
McClintock.
FACE Act on its face, so to speak. As I read it, it forbids blockading abortion clinics and churches. As I read it, it protects the right of individuals to peaceably assemble.
it's not even
So what am I
hate
missing
listening,
here?
it's data gathering.
I'm afraid that the
That's what it is. It's data
application
gathering.
of the FACE Act has really been a false one. As Chairman Roy discussed, there have been 55 individuals prosecuted.
Okay, so is that the fault of the act itself, or is that the fault of the way the act is enforced?
That specific concern is the fault of the enforcement.
I mean,
Okay, that's
Kim.
what I thought. I heard Mr. Nadler say that, well, instead of repealing the FACE Act, and I'm not the least bit sure that we should, Republicans ought to urge the Trump administration to prioritize enforcement of the FACE Act on behalf of pro-life activists. Well, I find this just as offensive as prioritizing enforcement of the FACE Act on behalf of pro-abortion activists. Both courses are deeply destructive to the rule of law and to the concept of equal protection of the law. This is the reason justice is always depicted as being blindfolded, because it shouldn't matter
Food is
what
people.
anyone's personal opinions are. The laws are to be applied equally
Soylent Green
to
is
all.
people.
I hope I misunderstood what the ranking member said in his prepared remarks. because it seems to confirm.
You mean
the
her
complaint
prepared remarks?
that this law is susceptible to political abuse. In fact,
Sir?
he sounded like he was encouraging us to abuse it, which I
Excuse
find
me?
bizarre.
Which ranking member are you talking about?
You know, if we're to slant enforcement of the law, depending upon who's in power,
Yeah.
it seems to me we've lost
Snowpiercer.
the
Ooh, don't eat
fundamental
that.
principle of equal justice under law. And this problem, I think, is not limited to the FACE Act, though. It's
Yeah, tank girl, because we need
we've
to be
seen
the we
selective
need water.
enforcement
Yeah, I
and
agree with
a
that.
different treatment between, say, George Floyd.
I would handle that
rioters
post-apocalyptic
and January 6th rioters.
trope.
Or the Lois Lerner's selective enforcement against Tea Party activists a few years ago.
Teresa, you don't have
Should
to be
we
sorry,
perhaps, instead
darling.
of
I'm glad
looking
you're
at
here.
repealing the FACE Act, look at clearly defining what selective enforcement looks like and then applying criminal or civil penalties to such
I'm going to go to the dress barn later. Are you going to meet me? Because they're having a 2-for-1
And I agree
Wednesday.
wholeheartedly that the FACE Act, as is every criminal statute, should be applied even-handedly. That's the promise of our republic.
And it is.
I would say,
because it's
There's the
being administered
punchline.
by people with political
Aaron.
biases, that's perhaps not always going to happen. And it certainly is not happening in this case, but also it's not happening in a lot of other cases. So you know, is there some law that you could recommend that would define what selective enforcement is and sanction those who apply it in a biased manner?
so that's an interesting question. Selective enforcement is typically
Wait,
raised as
what?
a constitutional claim, either under the Equal Protection Clause.
Yeah, wouldn't you
or the
make that
First
part of your
Amendment.
appeal or something?
And so
And
if
hasn't
you
that guy
had
lost like 6 appeals or so? I
federal
don't know how many
selective
appeals.
enforcement claim itself, you'd have
Or
to
an
think how
appeal,
that
I don't
would
know.
play out. But I do think that the constitutional cases provide a good sort of framework of reference. And what those cases provide is that when parties are similarly situated, there is prosecutorial discretion, but when you have similarly situated parties, the law requires that they be treated equally.
Mr. Cranford, very briefly, your thoughts on the subject.
Would you repeat the question, please, sir?
The question is, since these laws are subject to enforcement by individuals who have their own biases, is there a law we should be looking at that would
Oh my God! How do we
identify what
protect
selective
against
enforcement
the?
looks like and sanction it?
Wait,
Actually,
what
it is
other
a very
laws might
difficult
they not
area,
follow
as Ms.
because they
Hawley
have
mentioned.
bias? Wait,
The
what?
selective enforcement case law, the precedents are frankly not entirely consistent. And there is, because of the discretion afforded prosecutors across the board, a great deal of disagreement as to when that's too far and they've transgressed the constitutional limits. It's frankly a matter for the courts, and we really do need more clarity in that area.
No,
I can't
actually, it's
point you to another
it's pretty
statute or
much
a
part
law
of the
that would help
courts.
at this point.
Case by case. Yeah, it's how that works.
Thank you.
I thank the gentleman from California. And with that, I'll recognize my friend from Texas, Mr. Hunt.
Hire
Mr. Chairman.
robots.
Weaponization, two-tier justice, prioritization. What do these words have in common? They describe the unspoken policy of the Biden administration when it comes to justice. And you can apply this unspoken policy to any Biden administration agency. For weaponization, Biden weaponized the
Wow.
DOJ to go after a former
Even
president
the-
for political
the-
purposes.
the
But he
Smithsonian?
said Trump was undermining democracy. For two-tier justice in the
Honey,
classified
it's
documents
fine.
case,
He already won.
Biden directed the FBI
Don't
to
worry.
raid Mar-a-Lago, yet gently
Oh, the three
browse the
sisters and their
classified
husbands are having their
documents
annual
that were
holiday
sitting in
dinner.
President
Oh, have
Biden's
fun,
garage.
Jim.
For
Oh, and
prioritization,
Mrs. Nalgren.
Biden's FEMA
Have so
department in
much fun.
Florida only helped storm victims who didn't have Trump signs in their front yard.
No, that's
Think about
not
that.
actually how it happened. But
it should come to
okay.
no surprise that we're talking about another
And it wasn't
example
Florida,
of
it was
weaponization,
North Carolina,
two-tier justice,
wasn't it?
and prioritization
Wait a minute.
in today's
Do you even
hearing.
know the story, Mr.
We're here
Cunt-
today to talk
Cunt-
about the
I mean,
DOJ's
Hunt?
selective enforcement of the FACE Act. It is aimed at ensuring equal protection for both
Somebody wrote this
pro-life
for
and
me.
pro-choice movements. Under the Biden administration, I'll let you guess whether the pro-life or pro-choice
Somebody wrote it for
activists
me.
have
And
been
then
charged
the
with more
bad
crimes.
wolf came
The
running
FACE
down
Act has
the
been
hill.
the law of the land for the last
And
20
they
years. And the
attacked
Biden's
the
DOJ,
red
in just 4
riding
years, has
a
brought over a
GOP
quarter of
bitch.
all FACE Act
And
prosecutions.
that was the only
There are many examples,
bitch
but I will
they
highlight
attacked.
an egregious example. In
He's
Mount
a
Juliet,
greatest.
Tennessee, pro-life
He's the
advocates
greatest
were
example.
arrested for singing and praying in a
Oh my
hallway
God,
of a
they were
shared
singing
general
and praying.
medical office building.
They were singing and praying.
Featuring
Yes,
an
they
an
were. They were
abortion
singing
clinic.
and praying and
They
blocking the
initially were
door. They were
faced
singing and
with
praying and
misdemeanor
blocking the
charges.
door.
But
Don't go
magically,
in there. I'll
17
show
months
you
later, the
pictures of
DOJ
the bloodiest
charged these
babies.
Christians
That's right.
with federal
That's right.
crimes.
Never
Among
mind,
these
I have a
charged was Eva
period.
Everett,
I already
now
know what
89
lots
years
of blood
old.
looks
She's a
like. So
survivor
get
of a
out of
communist
my
concentration
way.
camp in
I'm
Yugoslavia
gonna
after
have
World War
this
II. That's
abortion
right.
today.
In Biden's America, you can escape a communist concentration camp and then come to America and be arrested for praying.
Oh my
Mr. Vaughn,
God,
thank you for being
Becky.
here today.
She
glad that
broke
you
the
avoided
law, all
prison
right?
time as
Grandma
well,
fucked
sir.
around. Now
But
she's
did
finding
you receive
out.
3 years
Get over it.
supervised release? Is that correct?
That is correct, after 18 months of pre-sentencing supervision.
Could you have ever imagined living in
Oh,
a
so
country,
literally
this
you've
country,
never
that you would be
actually
arrested
been in
for
a
praying,
prison cell?
singing,
Is
and
that what
providing
I'm
sidewalk
telling you?
counseling?
1 is a million in mag and math.
We, as a country, should have seen this coming.
but so
under
wait.
Under the COVID censorship regime that was the Biden administration.
That was the Trump
they restricted
administration.
Churchgoers from attending
Wait,
church,
Hunt,
but allowed
wait, Mr.
people
Hunt.
to shop
Mr. Hunt.
in liquor stores.
Mr. Hunt.
I guess that's because
He's like,
Tito's
damn it, why didn't I
and
read
Crown
this?
Royal were the
Reread
cure
this
for COVID.
statement.
Maybe we'll never know. Mr. Compton,
But he's
Mr.
a
Compton,
very,
I gotta
very
tell you something.
energetic
You could
actor.
probably imagine, sir, I am not a big fan of the KKK. I am a direct descendant of slavery, and I'm also to tell you that the Klan has been dead for a very long time. Why in God's name would you evoke
What is
and
happening
act
right
like
now?
this under these circumstances?
What
I wish
what
I
is happening
understood
right
exactly
now?
what the
What's
logic was
happening?
behind it as
Can
far
you
as
tell me
any
what's
legitimate
happening right
reasoning,
now?
sir. What I do know is Sanjay Patel authored an article in 2022 for the DOJ's own internal kind of a law review magazine where he laid out why he suggested they use it, and he was the first one to use it as the prosecutor in the District of Columbia case, and that was because it would increase the penalty. And because it's easier to prove conspiracy, you don't need what's called a predicate act under 18 U.S.C. Section 241, this conspiracy against rights statute. Moreover, sir, if I may add, the conspiracy against rights depends on a federal right.
Yes.
Traditionally, that was a constitutional right.
Oh, breaking news.
Now, as we
Ashton
know,
Kutcher
there
is a
is
real
no
fucking
federal
asshole.
constitutional right to abortion. So
I
the
don't
right they're
care.
hanging that on is the thin,
I don't
very
care.
slender thread of a right to
Everyone
access
is going to pay attention to that. We must not.
It is.
It'll
a
be taken
mystery,
care
and
of
it
by
is
other
such an
eyes.
Unjust and excessive punishment, use of that statute, abuse of that statute, that, as I suggested in my opening remarks, it needs to be separately addressed.
Of course it does. Thank you for answering the question, sir. The selective prosecution of FACE Act violations is a two-tier justice at its finest. The Biden administration, Attorney General Merrick Garland's persecution of their political opponents is real and is pervasive. They painted January 6 protesters out to be violent criminals, yet President Biden pardoned his son, Hunter Biden, and many other actual felons because they were on his side
Hunter
of the
Biden
aisle, period.
was it January 6th?
Peaceful January 6 protesters
Get out
are
of
in
town.
jail, while violent criminals are pardoned and roam free. And thank God they're going to get out of here on January 20th. I could guarantee you that. Merrick Garland surveilled parents
Why,
at
are you
school
doing the
board
pardons?
meetings who were simply expressing their right to free speech. Garland, however, did nothing about Antifa, while cities in this country
What
were being
Antifa do?
burned to the ground.
What did Antifa do?
Biden has been on the wrong side of justice every single time, and we know it. The American people know it. We've expressed our sentiments just last month, and I can assure
Has he
you,
been
we will
secretly
have justice
convicted
back in
and I have
America
no
on
idea?
January
Wait,
20th.
did that
Thank you all
happen?
very much for being here.
Thank
That
the gentleman
didn't-
from
that
Texas.
happened and I don't
His
even
time having
know?
Expired. I would ask consent. I've been
God.
receiving correspondence from folks from all over the country asking us to repeal the FACE Act and stop what's happening to people.
Yeah,
like Mr.
I know.
Vaughn
All of those
and
are
Mike
actually
Mazzano,
from like organizations from the
consent
CNP. Get out of town. If Jenny Thomas's name is on all of those,
Without
I'm gonna
objection,
have a kitten.
Is the gentleman from Ohio seat recognition?
I was hoping for 5 minutes of question.
Sir?
Imagine that. No, I appreciate it.
No,
Mr.
no.
Vaughn, so the day that you were at the, you were praying and singing at the clinic, did the local police show up?
They did.
And were they called by the clinic?
They were.
Okay, so I want to get all the facts straight. And maybe you did this
To
in opening
save life,
statement. I
we
apologize,
printed
I
the
had to
internet
step
because
out
we're pro-life.
a couple times here during the hearing. So you're at in front of an abortion clinic. You're praying and singing. You were on the public sidewalk.
You're in front of an abortion.
Inside, it was a multi-use building. We were in the hallway of a public building.
Okay.
Oh.
Outside the doors of the abortion clinic.
And there were other people with you.
Oh.
Correct.
Yeah. And you were charged with conspiring to stop people from going into the clinic and their rights, as Mr. Crampton was just talking about.
Correct.
Are we going to relitigate it here,
Did you physically
Jim?
push anyone?
Are we going to
hold anyone back?
relitigate
Did
this
you lock
now,
arms
Jimmy
with your
Jordan?
co-conspirators, or what'd you do?
No, I did none of that. I
None of that.
prayed. I kneeled and prayed on the side of the hallway at one point.
The side?
And
Which
sang
side?
hymns when they were singing. I interacted with the police department. The local police got a little agitated at one point, and they came and shoved a couple people.
Oh, really? Just
walked
out of
back
the
down hallway
blue?
with them
Just
and
like
tried to
out of the
ensure them
blue?
these people were
Boy, I
peaceful
hope
and
those
keep
two
peace,
people sued that
with the
police department.
And ultimately talked with the negotiator and the police chief, along with another member, and led to a peaceful resolution. People that wanted to be.
No one was arrested that day.
There were 8 people arrested.
Were you arrested that day?
I was not.
You were not arrested
No,
that
sir.
day. Okay.
Have you spent any time
and
in a
then-
prison
and
cell?
What day was that?
Get
What
the
day
fuck
were you
outta
there
here.
At the clinic praying and
That was March 5th.
March 5th of what year?
22. I'm sorry, of 21.
21.
Correct, yes.
Because it's a year later, it just happens to be March 5th again, right?
It's October 5th of
October
22.
5th, excuse me.
Yes.
So a year
Okay,
later.
yeah.
that's
Have
right,
I got
October
the
5th.
story
So
right?
almost a year
I
later
mean,
is when,
okay, yeah.
federal
I mean,
police show
it
up,
was
the FBI shows
sunny.
up at
I
your
mean, it
house.
was raining, and
Okay,
then
in the interim,
you
in that
fell down. I
11-month
mean, you
time
stood
frame,
up.
What kind of contact did you have with any law enforcement or any prosecutor or anything like that?
None.
None?
None whatsoever.
So you weren't arrested that day and other people were. You didn't do anything wrong that day. In fact, when there was some
Well,
concern,
apparently-
you tried to de-escalate it.
You might be skipping over a
nothing
couple
happens.
things
Local
there,
police
Jimmy.
said, This Mr. Vaughn guy, he's doing the Lord's work, whatever they said. They didn't do
Right,
anything.
what'd they say?
But then
Did they say
11
that?
or 10 months later, the FBI
Okay.
shows up at your door.
After their investigation, you
18
mean?
months later, correct. They showed up.
Okay,
armed
after
and
their
everything.
investigation?
So that day, the police in their media press release that evening complimented how peaceful and orderly we were, how we interacted with them. And the lead
Okay, is that
detective-
evidence?
I'm sorry, the lead negotiator.
Did they
testified
testify
us at
for
federal
you?
trial.
Did
So
they
we
testify
had
at your
good
trial?
relations
And
with
then
the
how'd that
police.
work out?
And it's been pointed out, if I can, I'd love to read just a
No.
quick
You know if the
statement.
FBI talked to the local police prior
Nope.
to coming to your house and arresting you?
They did not. I asked them that question on the hour-long ride to Nashville in the back of the car. I said, did my sheriff know or anybody know? I said, no, we didn't bother telling them.
Why would they?
You
Why
shut
would
up.
they tell?
Shut
They don't
up.
have to tell you anything, honey
And if
bun.
I remember the facts again, it was early morning, show up.
7:15 in the morning.
7:15.
you
That's
and-
not
you and
early,
your wife
bitch.
and
I've
children
already
right
been
there and-
broadcasting
Right.
for
Some of your kids, they
45
held off
minutes.
on
Get the
the
fuck out of
property.
here. I fucking put a full face of makeup
Where
on
was the
by
conspiracy?
6:15.
What
Give
was-
me a
what were you
fucking
conspiring
break.
to do? Because I don't see the conspiracy.
Grow
I'm
up.
troubled as the legal professionals here, Mrs. Hawley and Mr. Crampton have pointed out, I'm troubled by this whole conspiracy thing, but I don't see any
Are
conspiracy
you? Are
on
you
your part.
troubled by
No, the
it? What are
conspiracy
you gonna do
was
about
I
it?
ideologically agreed that abortion should stop. And I was in the hallway with other people that did that.
Were there
Well,
like
then you should
emails
not
at the
be in that
trial where you
fucking
said,
hall-
hey, we're
yeah.
all going to meet
4
at
a.m.
the
head
clinic
bagger.
on
Get
this
the
day?
fuck
Or did
out of
they-
here. I
is
don't
that
feel
the
sorry
cons-
for
is that how
you.
they
What are you sleeping in
demonstrated some
for?
conspiracy?
There was no evidence like that presented as to me. They had no, the only thing they showed in that piece of the trial was my driver's license that indicated that I lived an hour from the
And then
clinic and drove
apparently
an
he
hour.
had
So that was the tie to the
11
conspiracy.
kids
And
all
if
of a
the-
sudden.
And if the FBI called you and said,
And then the
Mr.
woman
Vaughn,
sitting
we're gonna
next to
charge you
Chip
with this
Roy
crime. Can you
has
show
like
up
a
and meet us at the
halter
local
top
FBI
that is a
whatever,
fake
Nashville, I think you said. You'd
pearl
called
Barbie
you'd got
pink
legal counsel, you got Mr.
fake
Crampton, you showed
Chanel
up whenever Daddy
print
told you, right?
halter top of all
Absolutely.
But
things.
instead they came to your house. Yeah.
It looks like she just came
Mr.
from her
Crampton, what
weekend in the
is,
Hamptons.
Are traditional Catholics
And it's
radical?
winter.
Only in the eyes of extremists of the Biden administration.
Yeah, only in the eyes of the people who
It looks
show
odd,
up at 6
okay?
in the morning and arrest a guy when the
I'm
local
sorry.
police.
I'm
I mean, we're willing to
shallow
give
when
him
it
a
comes to
medal.
fashion.
Only they are the people who are going to say that if you're a traditional Catholic, you're an extremist. You're a radical.
No one would say that.
Ms. Hawley, I got 32
No one
seconds.
gives a
I feel
shit.
bad. I'll give you the last 30 seconds.
No.
Anything you want to add to the discussion?
Anything? Come on, bitch.
Thank you, Congressman Jordan.
I
One
love
thing
you.
I would like to
Is he the
mention,
real man
is
you've
that
been
the
waiting
FACE
for
Act,
there?
is on top
I bet there's.
of
Is there
state
wife
law.
swapping going
So as
on?
members of Congress have recognized before, this
Is there
would not
Senate
allow
House
criminal
wife
conduct to
swapping
go
happening
unpunished.
here? Is she
Every
giving
state
him
has
the
trespass
look?
laws, has nuisance laws. clause has those sorts of things that are perfectly.
Which is good
And we
taste.
saw it in the example.
There are some pretty
Exactly,
bad
and
tastes.
similarly,
You
with
know.
Any of the 8 people.
I
that
think
the
we
local
should start
police
that
arrested
rumor.
Mr. Bond, did any of
She
them
was
get charged
giving
with
him
FBI? How
bedroom
many of them?
eyes.
All of them?
All of them.
All of them. Okay, but
They had
She
double
was
charges.
giving him
Yeah, local
Senate
charges and
bathroom
federal.
if you did
eyes.
something wrong, you did it.
And similarly, with Mr. Hook, who I know has
Sister
testified to this
Whine.
committee, the state and local prosecutors declined to prosecute. They made a federal case out
my
of it,
God.
was acquitted by a
Oh,
jury of
my
his
God.
peers,
And
and an
then
Obama-appointed judge
what
noted
happened?
that this was stretching the FACE
Oh
Act
my
a
God,
little thin.
Obama was still
Yeah, no
president?
kidding.
Oh my God.
Thank you. Thank
Senate
all of our
cloakroom
witnesses,
eyes.
and I want to thank the chairman for his good work on this piece of legislation.
I thank
No,
the
Senate
chairman, the gentleman from
bathroom.
Ohio. I
Let's
thank,
keep it
the
down and
witnesses.
dirty.
This concludes today's hearing.
That's it.
Without
That's it
objection,
right
all
there.
members will have 5 legislative days
That's
to
the
submit
Barbie
additional written
top right
questions for
there.
their witnesses or additional materials for the record.
Right there.
Without objection, the hearing is adjourned.
Oh man. There, right there. The Barbie top. The Barbie toppeth. Yeah, she said, I want to see you in your wrestling tights. I just want to see if the House is voting on anything. Isn't the Barbie chair? I'm sorry, it is. I'm not going to hide on that one because that's just silly. That's just stupid and silly. Stupid and silly. Let's see here. I thought maybe there was a floor vote. No. But I guess I'm wrong. All right. Well, that's fine. Yeah, that outfit's it's not working. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm all for like crazy kooky, eclectic. That's not eclectic, that's lazy. And nobody who wears a halter made of I'm sorry. Distracted. Plus all the incredible Christofascism in the room was entirely too much to bear. Mr. What's his name? Mr. Vaughn has not learned a fucking scintilla of lesson about his actions. Oh man. A long way to go. We're on the highway to hell. We're on the highway to hell. Highway to hell. All right. I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much for stopping in for this twice baked episode. Appreciate it. Damn it, I didn't change the name. Oh, well. Anyway, thank you for coming to Twice Baked this afternoon. Hopefully, I'll see you tonight on Discord. Oh, yeah, I got to put up those things right now. I'll put up the link to the Discord room for the movie tonight, which is The Brink, a 2019 documentary about Steve Bannon. So, yep, 3 penny whore bag is going to come up. All right. Bye, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Thanks for stopping.